Something was off. Friends of killers reveal the first red flags they ignored. I sat next to him in choir class. He was always kind of off. He operated on his own wavelength, constantly in his own world, never really engaging with anybody. People just didn't really exist on his radar. On a class trip, we slept in the same hotel room, and he walked around undressed like I wasn't even there. I always assumed he was on the spectrum, but in hindsight, it might have been something much worse, like schizophrenia. He never seemed aggressive or anything, but nobody ever talked to him enough to make that conclusion in the first place. A few months ago, he ended his mother's life with a kitchen knife. It was so bad, dental records were needed to identify the body. He implied in his confession that he ate part of her. He waited until his dad came home from work to show him what he had done. Claimed he saw a sign from the devil that told him to do this. That might have been a lie. From what I heard, he was very excited to tell the police what he had done. And from what I do know about him, he might have said it for the attention. He turned himself in, waived his Miranda rights, and confessed to everything. When the cops found him, he was literally soaked in red. He refused to shower it off, so they had to hose him down before they put him in a cell. He's looking at 40 years in prison. His mum was an amazing woman. She tailored our suits for choir and was constantly volunteering. If there was an event, she was there. She was going to be her town's councilwoman next year. She loved her son very much and just didn't deserve to go like that. They were a regular customer in my shop. He'd come in after his shift to buy beer and tobacco. On one occasion, he caught and helped us evict a shoplifter. He seemed friendly enough. Then a local woman went missing and was eventually pulled out of a river a few weeks later. They announced that they were looking for somebody in connection with her death, and it was him. They had CCTV footage of him tailing her through a park and footage of him buying beer in a shop, still unconfirmed to this day being our shop as they blurred out the surroundings. Anyway, as we had a TV in our shop switched to the news channel, as it was a rolling story local to us, we started to discuss the guy, if we'd seen him on the day she went missing, that kind of thing. We hadn't, but it was at that point when one of my staff, a young girl, who had previously said to management that she didn't want to work the closing shift anymore because there were too many creepy men around, she told us that he used to stare at her when he came into the store in a way that made her really uncomfortable, enough to not want to be on the floor when he came in. They never got to question him about the murder, as he was found dead in a local park a few days later. He had strung himself up. Was that the Alice Gross case? I remember that one. Terrible, terrible circumstances. The killer was already a convicted murderer in Latvia, if I remember correctly. It was huge news locally. The biggest manhunt in London since the July bombings. Also, women frickin' know creeps. That's our biggest defense mechanism for real. I'm very respectful of someone's gut feeling as a result. My word, how did he get let into the UK with a record like that? I think there's of course room for rehabilitation of most folks, but this guy was still clearly unhinged, and I refuse to believe he had a diligently applied entry exam. Just awful. I went through primary and high school with a guy in the year below me who seemed a little, well, distant. We lived near each other and caught the bus from the same stop. He was a bit of a bully, but it was something more than that. Like you could tell he wasn't a bully because he was hurting inside or because he felt threatened in some way. He was a bully because he did what he wanted to do and didn't realize that it hurt other people. Like the kind of kid who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Not long after I left my hometown, I heard that he'd been charged with a murder of the sort that you just can't talk about on YouTube. Victim outside a category you can discuss here. Horrible business. He was sentenced to 36 years with a non-parole period of 27 years. Well, this is wild. I know a guy who slew a nurse and wanted to be our town's first serial killer. He bought a murder kit online and shanked her over 50 times. Let's call him Steve. I knew him through scouts. Now, to preface, our scout troop was pretty laid back. We didn't tend to bother with badges, and the two troop leaders were pretty cool guys. Mostly, we played silly games like crab football, we built catapults to fire stuff across the hall at each other. You get the picture. We were a little gang of misfits. But Steve was really weird. First time it came out was when he'd do this thing where he'd get his butt out and just dance around. At first it was like, oh, outrageous and funny, and he kept getting told to stop, but he kept doing it. It got a bit annoying. None of us were keen to see his bare arse after a while. Then it got boring, and then just outright weird when it's not remotely funny. No one was laughing, all of us other kids were asking him to stop, and he continued. He also used to bring in printouts of super gross adult magazines. Obviously, these were confiscated and thrown away. Again, he was clearly trying to gross people out for his amusement. A few times he was suspended for a week or so, but given that we were quite laid back and the troop leaders were good guys, they probably couldn't bring themselves to bin him off completely. It was a long time ago, so I can't recall all the details, but I recall him being quite childish in mentality, but also very creepy. When I found out he had ended someone, I was shocked but not surprised. Then I remembered I'd played hide-and-seek in the dark with this guy in a hall with a kitchen full of knives. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable. He was cold and just seemed angry for no reason. They'd mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and he had got physically aggressive with the girl before. Turns out, controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was digging a hole in the backyard, and she asked what he was doing, and he replied, "Digging your grave." He hit her, said if he can't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. He somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break, and they went missing for a few days. Turns out he had knifed her to death, thrown her in a river, and then ended himself. I met the girl only a few times, and him only the once, but the fact that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. I worked at a box store about 20 years ago. A guy I worked with was always off and would give away pocket knives to other employees. One day he came in with scratches all over his face. He'd committed the unspeakable act and then ended someone the day before, using a pocket knife he had given our coworker later that day. Friend of the family's always had a thing about taking pocket knives as a gift. A superstition about how it was bad luck and would result in the knife somehow ending up in your back, metaphorically speaking. Turns out it was a good piece of advice in this instance. My grandfather gave me a pocket knife when I was a little kid, but made me give him a penny for it. It's thought to sever the relationship when you give someone a knife as just a gift. I knew there was something off about him when he said there was. A teenager, his mother and his stepfather lived around the corner from me. My mother knew them better than myself, but we all thought they were lovely. A couple of years ago, the son went to the hospital several times asking for help. He claimed he had voices telling him to kill his stepfather, but each time he went, he was released and told to come back, and they'd give an appointment. A few weeks later, during a small argument, he knifed his stepfather to death in the front garden. He turned himself in the next day, and wasn't convicted as he sought help before it happened. Instead, he got the treatment he needed. I see a lot of people wondering if it might have been a defense or planned murder. It wasn't. The way he was killed and how the son acted after removed any doubt. My uncle murdered somebody and is currently serving life in prison. From my earliest memory, I knew he had some screws loose. He caught his wife at her lover's house, so he shot the guy. He was going to shoot her too, but she convinced him she wouldn't tell anyone. He burned the guy's house down in an attempt to cover his tracks. As soon as his wife could get free of him, she immediately reported him. As far as me saying I always got creep vibes from him, he always reminded me of a poor man's Charles Manson. I knew a guy who killed his dad with a baseball bat, was found not guilty. I met his dad when he came into the bar I worked at, and that guy was a nightmare. He'd squeeze people's hands when he shook them. He and his son were both boxers, and the dad was really rough with him apparently. The day he was found not guilty, he sent a text to someone at the bar saying, "I told you I'd get off." Man, that hand-squeezing thing is messed up, and I've experienced it and truly believe it's the mark of a sadist. I remember one guy doing it to me when I was a little girl and how his eyes gleamed as I yelled and finally managed to grab my hand back. There's a lot of closet weirdos out there. Cue the narrator realizing he's met a lot of sadistic people by this narrow definition you've given. And I'll admit, I've never met a painful squeezer who you could rule off as not being an absolute sadist. I worked in a food court in my early 20s. This family would come in pretty regularly. They stuck out because they were giants. Mum was easily 6'1" and Dad was 6'7". They had a few offspring too. Nothing really stuck out at the time. They never seemed happy, but they never fought. They just always looked like they were just coming out of mourning. I heard a few years back that the mum decided to leave the dad. The dad ended the whole family and then removed himself from the picture as well. Another coworker did something similar. He lived with his elderly father. He was super nice, but just always had this deep sadness behind his face. His girlfriend broke up with him, his dad's health went south, Everything became too much for him, so he shot his dad and then used the weapon to take himself off the running as well. Even after hearing that, I felt bad for him. He seemed like a guy with a big heart, and if he'd just had a day to decompress and someone to talk to, I think that might have gone a lot differently. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? My ex-coworker was always a huge jerk who nobody liked to work with. He'd always be on his phone and talking to someone, even when he had a customer waiting to order in the drive-thru. The moment I knew he had something wrong with him was when I caught him looking for his dab pen in one of the lockers in the back room. He always used a top locker, but he was searching through one at the bottom, which happened to be my locker for that day. I told him that, so he just stared me in the face for a second and walked away. Later that same year, I learned that he shot and ended someone at a gas station. To clarify, he was most likely trying to steal from me, and the fact that he made up his lie on the fly set me off, not to mention the creepy stare at the end. I was running a video game program for kids a few years ago, and one day an older, 19-year-old teen came in. I didn't want to allow him in, but one of my coworkers had already said it was okay. He exhibited a lot of completely unacceptable behaviors. When I told him to stop, he did the same thing you described, just stared at me for a few seconds without saying anything. There was nothing in those eyes. I went home and told my boyfriend at the time that I'd met someone who'd end up as an unspeakable act offender or murderer someday. And well, to put it bluntly, I was right. The murderer's mother ended up turning him in. I never suspected a thing. She was the nicest woman. I even let her babysit my cousin when I had custody of him for a little while. She was my neighbor, a couple of houses down the road, and everybody loved her. She grew gigantic pumpkins, was always outside, so everyone interacted with her a lot. I moved away, and a few years later, I was shocked to hear everything from my family and friends who still lived in the area. The story: she was married to a man. I knew him from my time living there too. One day, he was just gone. She was all beaten up. She said he beat her up. We always suspected this had happened before the incident, and he had left her because he got another woman pregnant a few towns over. We never heard from him again, but didn't really have a reason to. She'd mention every once in a while that he was still making her life a misery, and she even ended up beat up on another occasion after this disappearance. He was self-employed and didn't really have any family, so none of us had any reason to suspect anything. 3 years later, she was dating another man. While dating this man, the police had been investigating her for stealing money from the grocery store she worked at. They went to the boyfriend's cabin, where they both were, to arrest her. She came to the door, said, "Okay, let me go put on some clothes." The police waited at the door. I obviously wasn't there for this part, so this is what I've heard. The police then heard 2 shots. They ran inside and she had poured gasoline and set the house on fire, then shot her pet and taken herself out of the running as well. It took some time to get the house fire under control. Once they did and began investigating, they found another body in the basement that didn't die in the fire but several days earlier. The body in the basement was her boyfriend. Then they began investigating further and found a blue 55-gallon drum in her backyard that contained her husband. So, she had killed 2 people and her dog, and all she was suspected of was stealing from the grocery store. Is it weird that I feel she could have gotten away with it if she would have stepped out of the house and gone with the police? There's a chance they wouldn't have investigated the cabin depending on exactly how the grocery theft went down and what they wanted to see. Guilty conscience. She probably thought they had more on her and were just taking her on the grocery charge to begin with. The murderer I knew was more of an acquaintance or casual friend. He lived down the hall from me and we hung out sometimes, but not like just the 2 of us. Still, we'd chill at each other's place regularly. I passed him one day in the stairwell and I said hi. He said hi back, but called me by the wrong name. He was really distracted and kind of awkward. He didn't make eye contact and just kept moving. I remember thinking, maybe we don't know each other as well as I thought. Later he was playing Nintendo, yep, my Nintendo 64, this was a while ago, with my roommate when I came home. He apologized and said, sorry, his mind was elsewhere. Couple of days later, there were cops all over the building, interviewing people and searching his place. They'd found the guy's roommate with a bullet in the back of his head in an abandoned lot across town. The next day, he confessed. There was a kid I went to high school with who always gave me the creeps. We had a lot of mutual friends, so we'd always end up hanging out, and it always made me feel really uncomfortable. Our senior year, he got suspended for like a week because somebody had found and turned in a hit list that he'd made. No one had really taken it too seriously, though. About 3 years after we graduated, he was in the news for murdering a man in our town that he barely knew. He told the police that he held the man's eyes open so he could actually watch his life leave his body. Updating this because I remembered that I actually knew a second murderer. I'm related to someone who attempted to murder his wife by knifing her in the back several times with a butter knife when she found out he was gay, and then many years later he did the same to his new partner, successfully, after they broke up. Some real mixes between unassuming serial offenders of this sort and the kind who really project it well in advance, and who often end up coming clean. Just goes to show how it could be anyone, I guess. Sleep tight, folks. I would never have guessed. He was the sweetest, kindest, gentle giant of a guy. Kind of a weirdo, but still a great guy overall. I remember once that he shed a tear just by walking about his kid because he was so filled with emotion from having him in his life. He ended up killing his wife, running away with his child, starting the longest Amber Alert in the history of Canada. As he tried escaping to a different province, he killed another man to steal his car. I'm still unsure today if I should have seen anything at any point. It comes to haunt my nightmares from time to time. Had an employee on my work crew, acting strange and not listening to direction, had goofy, huge sideburns, ended up going to jail for a short time. When he got out, he shot his girlfriend and her parents. Looking back, I should have known immediately, but I didn't even know what I was seeing. In 2016, I was working as a server. One of my coworkers was always complaining about her crappy husband and how they always fought. They were from Chicago and kind of just always loud and aggressive, so I didn't think much of it. One night, they both came in for dinner and drinks and sat in my section, and I was looking forward to finally meeting her husband so I could give him a face. I just remember not being able to look him in the eye, feeling super uncomfortable anytime I needed to go over to their table because my friend would try to spark conversation and I wanted to talk to her, but the guy's presence just sitting there would make my skin crawl. They left that night, but soon she stopped coming to work, and then a couple of weeks later, news broke about them both being found dead in their apartment, the husband being the murderer. It was heartbreaking, and I no longer take lightly word of domestic disputes. I never would have suspected. Quiet, shy lad at school with a small circle of friends. Started losing his hearing as a teenager and became increasingly frustrated and angry. A minor disagreement in a pub, possibly caused by him not hearing the other guy, turned into a fight and he glassed him. The other guy bled out. One of the smartest, most popular, and friendliest guys at my high school. He stood up for people who got bullied. He included everyone. He helped people that needed it all the time. Seemed like an utterly selfless guy. Literally everyone loved him. 2 years ago, he ended his wife and then self-deleted after an argument. I knew this kid my entire life. We were friends in elementary and middle school. More middle school. He was your typical redneck kid, but a kind person. Imagine if Pinky from Pinky and the Brain grew up in the rural South. Well, as people do in school, we drifted apart. He honestly wasn't the person in the group I was friends with, he was just in that circle. So we went about our lives. A year after we graduated in the same town we all grew up in, he did in his entire family. Just for no reason. Nothing really provoked him from my understanding. He left and went to ride ATVs with his friend later that same day. They caught him and he had no memory of it. He went to court and got life and never could recount a single moment. At least that's what he said. It was weird seeing this guy who was, to your knowledge, just dumber than a bag of hammers, yet had an odd innocence to him, on trial for such atrocities. He just sat stone-faced the entire time, almost like he didn't understand what had happened. Not to say I felt bad for him, but I felt something. Sadness in general, perhaps? My bio dad ended up murdering my stepmom. Everyone in my family, my mum, and 2 older brothers definitely knew something was up with him. He had severe anger issues and was a horrible bully. Some of my earliest memories I have are of him being horrible to my brothers and I. He even almost throttled my mum to death a couple of times. Obviously, my mum was smart and divorced him, as she didn't want to see him end us. Years later, I come home from school and my mum and stepdad take us all to the side and tell us that he's shot our stepmom and is currently in jail. None of us were surprised. If anything, I was just so grateful that my mum left him. It's just so strange that I'm directly related to a murderer. This is my grandmother's story. She got pregnant at a young age by my grandfather and had to get married because it was the 1960s. He was a horrible man, and my grandmother went to the police multiple times because she felt like he'd wind up killing someone, but they just didn't take it seriously and ignored her. He later went on to throttle and beat someone to death with a baseball bat just a couple of years later. I'm editing this to include because I've seen a couple of people asking or speculating, but my grandmother did get away from him. They'd been separated when this finally went down, and he was put in prison. But I do know that he got out, and from what I was told, it was on an insanity plea. I'm not 100% on the details of his release, as he's a pretty taboo topic. But he finally died in 2014, though I didn't find that out until a year later. I'd only ever met him once. When did you get busted at a shameful or disgusting moment? When I was like 12 maybe, we got a new family computer with a scanner. I stayed up late playing with it in the den. After scanning everything I could find, I scanned my hands, face, feet, and I even scanned my butt. It was so slow though, the scans would be all messed up and jittery from me moving. So, I flipped a small trash can, put the scanner on top, and knelt down in front of it. I worked up something decently rigid down there and then closed the door on the scanner. Mid-scan, the door to the den slowly opens. It's my sleepy dad in his undies looking very confused at me doggy-styling the new family scanner. "What are you doing?" "I'm scanning my eggplant." He didn't react at all, he just backed out and closed the door. It was 5 seconds of my life maybe, but it haunts me. I think about how I just plainly stated my activity in a sort of defiant, "Well, what the hell do you think I'm doing?" kind of way, but also chose the medically correct term for my manhood, which didn't match the tone. Obviously, I had to say eggplant for YouTube. Like, as a kid, I could have said wee-wee or junk or whatever, but I said the P word. When I was 17 or something, I was watching an adult flick in the middle of the night. After I finished whacking it, I felt a slight pain in my ball bag, like someone had flicked their finger on it. That pain increased to the point where I had to walk it out. After some minutes, I began screaming from the pain when my parents came to my room. Don't worry, I wasn't undressed. They saw me in pain on the floor. At that moment, I thought I did something wrong while cranking the bald man, but was too ashamed to tell them. My dad rushed me to the emergency room where I was rushed in and my pants were taken off. Lying there with everything out, they gave me a nose spray which halted some of the pain. The doctor then started handling my equipment sack while the nurse stood next to me reminding me to breathe because the nose spray stopped the automatic breathing, if that makes sense. All the time, my dad was standing there looking, and the only thing I could think of at that moment was, oh no, did they think my eggplant is small? After that, the doctors brought me to another room while my dad was elsewhere. While going through the halls, I told the doctor I probably knew the cause and explained that I was exercising my vital organ. I don't remember the doctor's response, but I felt truly ashamed, like I was the only person doing such a thing. Later, the doctor told me I had testicular torsion, which is caused by the jewels not being attached to the sac. So I'm living in fear of it happening again to this day. Yet another random thing for me to be scared of randomly hitting me at any given moment of my life. I can imagine it would be a pretty scary deterrent towards engaging in that frequent teenage boy activity at any given time. Speaking of, at least a couple of these stories involve adult films, which I will be pronouncing as the word prawn instead of the word spelt P-O-R-N. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, my dad got my brother and I a computer to use. He set it up in the den and pretty much allowed us free, unsupervised access to it. He had gone out with his friends one night, and my brother, one of his friends, and myself were on the internet just typing in random things and adding .com to it. Now, back in the early 2000s, it didn't take long for us to stumble upon prawn, which led to us clicking on more and more prawn links because we were all like, holy crap, there's undressed women on here. Eventually, we bricked the computer and it blue screened on us. Instead of turning it off and unplugging the computer and turning off the monitor, we just left it and went to bed. My dad got home and saw the blue screen, did the old Control-Alt-Delete trick to pull up Task Manager, saw that we had multiple prawns pulled up on the web browser. At this point, he makes us all come out of the den, sits us on the couch and tries to make us confess as to why the computer was blue screened. We of course shrugged and acted like we had no clue. He then turned the monitor on and went through the internet history. We all just had to sit there while my dad clicked through some of the most heinous, debased stuff I've ever seen in my life. The whole time, he was just reading out the history and then he'd say something like, Jesus frickin' Christ, what the hell is wrong with you all? Yeah, that computer did not last very long. In the late 90s or early 2000s, we bought a pub and moved into it. It had a big screen downstairs and we lived above, but Sky Sports was so expensive for the business account, we basically hooked the giant screen to our box upstairs, so whenever the sport was on, it would show on the screen downstairs, so we couldn't watch TV upstairs except what was being shown on the big screen when this was happening. Anyway, one Sunday evening around 10 p.m. after the sport, bearing in mind the sport had finished at 6 p.m., I was freely browsing through the channels because the giant screen had been wound up into the ceiling, and my 14-year-old self came across some soft shell prawn. Curious, I started watching it. Suddenly, there was a big buzz from the phone that connected to downstairs. I answer it. It's my mum with laughing in the background. "What are you watching?" I was like, I was just flicking through channels. "Well, you've stayed on that one for a while, haven't you?" I forgot about the small TV in the bar area. It was still on and was showing the entire pub what my curious 14-year-old self was watching. I was mortified. Luckily, my mum never brought it up again, and neither did any of the customers, thankfully. When I was about 10, my parents were out, so I looked up some prawns on the family computer, which was mistake number 1. Then I kept hearing noises and thought somebody was in the house. So I ran to my room and called my dad, leaving the computer on, which was mistake number 2. My dad rushed home and ran around the house looking for an intruder. Nobody was there. It was just my next-door neighbor. We have a semi-detached house. Then obviously he saw what I was looking at on the computer and asked me about it. I told him the intruder must have broken in and searched for that stuff. When I was a curious teen, my brother walked into me trying to suck my own eggplant. Upside down, butt in the air, hunched over. When I was 12, my younger sister walked in on me playing Fondle the Dongle. I told her I couldn't pee and was trying to force and pump it out. She told my mum out of worry, said I needed a doctor to help me pee. When my mum confronted me about what my sister was saying, I then had to explain to her. When I was with my ex, we did some long distance for a while. While I'm not about sending exposed photos of myself willy-nilly, after not seeing each other for so long, you kinda get an urge to see the other person in that state. So, photos were exchanged. She was mostly interested in close-ups of my rock-hard tower, so I sent those. Upon returning home, I discovered that she had a picture of my proud pillar as my profile picture in her phone, meaning that if I'd call her, my manhood would be presented on the screen in all of its glory. I told her this was not a great idea. What if I'd call her and my phone was laying around somewhere? She said she's never had her phone laying around, so nobody would see. I didn't think any more about it. A few weeks later, we were having dinner with her parents, and she was talking about getting a new phone. Her father, with a straight face and in between 2 bites of his food, remarked, "Gee, if you get this new phone, does that mean you'll install a different picture for when he calls you?" And I died 1,000 deaths. In grade 9, we didn't really have internet at home, which wasn't unusual at the time. I saw this lady on Mary Povich that had a really large chest, and she advertised her webpage. This was something I just had to see. The internet was still enough of a novelty that any website was worth checking out, but Prawn was, up until now, only available by stealing dirty magazines. So the next day, in design class, I took the computer at the far end of the room, which was flanked by the darkened windows of an adjacent classroom. So you can guess where this is going. I turn the screen away from my classmates and teacher and start looking at the glorious, bountiful melons of this Mary Povich guest. Moments later, I notice movement in my peripheral vision, and when I turn my head, I see that the classroom I thought was empty was in fact full. It was full of laughing and pointing seniors. Their teacher rushes into the room screaming, "You can't do that!" grabs me by the wrist and physically pulls me to the principal's office. That principal was the best. He just looked at me and asked, "No internet at home?" And when I said, "No," he said, "Well, I think you've been through enough. Don't do it again," with a chuckle, and let me go without further punishment. Needless to say, I was pretty much famous in my high school in the worst way possible. People would literally point and laugh at me in the halls. "Hey, it's the prawn guy." Frick my life. You know what? He was correct. I feel like you would have had to move state when you finished your school after that incident. And holy crap, I have ended up using the prawn replacement a lot more than I thought I would in this video. In middle school, my friend got her chest and she wanted me to touch them. We probably spent 30 minutes every day before school feeling each other up in the back of the library until the librarian caught us and we were suspended. I wish I could say I enjoyed it, but going to first period with a rager wasn't ideal every day. My high school girlfriend and I were doing the deed in the sideways, lying down cuddling position. Mum walked in to show me a new Christmas decoration. To her, it looked like we were just cuddling, but she sat on the bed inches away from me actively inside my girlfriend and proceeded to talk about the decoration for like 10 minutes. I wonder if she knew. They never cared much about that stuff, so I think she was just oblivious. I tried to make a female adult toy out of hot glue. I was 18, came home very drunk from a night out, and hopped into bed with my then girlfriend. Fortunately for me, she woke up and was keen to fool around. Me being in the state I was in, I didn't have time for lubricant or aiming and went in hard and fast. The first and only push led to what I can only imagine as the equivalent of snapping your Achilles tendon, except this tendon wasn't located in my leg. It was in fact my frenulum, which you should Google. Or not. Instantly I panicked. I turned the light on and told my ex to hang on. I looked down to see that I had basically snapped my banjo string in half and essentially given myself a DIY snippy snip. There was lots of blood. I played it cool. My gut instinct was to run to the bathroom. Once I was in there, I wrapped my ding-dong up in toilet paper like Tutankhamun, emptied out the toothbrush cup holder, filled it with warm water, and stuck it in the cup to try to cool it down. Well, that hurt. By this time, I'd lost a fair amount of blood, and me being me, a hypochondriac and bad with blood, I tried to sit down on the side of the bath to not pass out. That didn't work. Long story short, I woke up to my ex-girlfriend's dad standing over me at 7 in the morning, about 3 hours later, after he had followed a trail of blood down the hallway to where he'd normally take his morning shower. There I was, lying in the bathtub, passed out, Johnson wrapped up in toilet paper, shoved inside his toothbrush cup holder in my birthday suit, covered in blood. My partner at the time fell back asleep after I'd left the bedroom that night and left her poor father to find me blackout drunk in his bathtub after trying to do the deed with his daughter. He thought I was dead. I wished I was. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Thought nobody was home, got a train run on me by my partner, and I was really loud. Turns out my mum was home, and she heard us doing the deed. When I was 5 or 6 years old, my mum was having a dinner party with some new friends. I'd been put to bed for the night, and I randomly got a rager. I learned that I could move it up and down if I flexed it. I thought this was so cool that I needed to share it with somebody. So I ran out to the dining room, completely undressed, and proceeded to show an entire dinner party my new trick with my favorite toy. Everyone was mortified, and I was confused why nobody else thought it was cool. My dad caught me editing the game files of The Sims to replace the female underwear textures with underwear that just made them look undressed. I looked up some reference material and edited them in Photoshop. That's a lot of effort to put into something so depraved, isn't it? I didn't even know about mods back then. I guess it's weird that I put more research into how to do this than just how to download a mod. At least this way I learned the hard way how low the female reproductive organ is. It looks pretty weird if you plop it in the same place that a Johnson would go. I was once extremely drunk and staying in a very expensive hotel in Hollywood. I went to bed as I should. I woke up in the middle of the night and had to go tinkle. I walked through the bathroom door and closed it behind me. I then realized that wasn't the bathroom door, but rather the room door. I was locked out of my room in a fancy hotel, drunk out of my mind, wearing only my undies. I went to the elevator lobby where there was a phone, and I called the front desk and explained my situation. They said they'd send someone up. I realized I couldn't wait and continued searching for a place to pee, and found a janitor closet with a rolling mop bucket in it. I took a giant whiz in the mop bucket and then walked back to my room door, where a bellhop who really didn't want to look me in the eye let me back into my room. I'm very sorry, Mondrian Hotel. I'd started taking antidepressants when I was around 20, and I didn't take the delayed climax warning as a side effect seriously. It was like blowing up a balloon to infinity and then it never pops, or shaking a soda can that doesn't explode after being opened. Very unsatisfying. That being said, after servicing myself started taking more than 10 minutes, I stopped taking those antidepressants. Around this time, though, I was also starting to date someone with a high libido, and she was okay with me not being able to finish, but was into a lot of stuff. One of those things was wanting me to stroke myself on her. Let me tell you, the awkwardness that goes from stroking yourself in front of a smiling girl for half an hour. That smile turns into a bored look as we both sink into what we're doing. Then I discovered, surprisingly, that I was into that. When she gave a defeated, "Are you close?" statement, the floodgates opened, and after being delayed for near an hour, there was a lot. Even worse, I definitely made a guttural sound of mostly air as my knees almost gave out when it happened. Yeah, so I'm on different antidepressants now. Well, that's certainly a predilection that I've never heard of before. I imagine getting off on people's disappointment could be a real plus for some guys. Literally a "joke's on you, I'm into that crap" moment. I was violently ill in my fiancé's house where we were living, while he was at work and his dad was working from home. I needed my mum to take me to the hospital. I screamed for my father-in-law's help, who entered the bathroom to my undressed body, crapping and throwing up at the same time in his bathtub. He called my mum for me, and we never spoke about it again. I thought God would kill me for cranking it when I was little, so I barely ever did it. But the house would know when I was doing it because I'd yell, "I'm sorry, God!" My family wasn't even religious. I didn't even know where I got that idea from. Somehow the idea of your parents being non-religious makes this so much funnier. Like, instead of being disappointed, they're just thoroughly confused by their weird kid. When my friends had to change my hygienic pad at a party in high school where I was drunk out of my mind, they gave me a shower to wake me up and took off the used pad and put a new one on and helped me get dressed. Not my proudest moment. In the same vein, I brushed a friend's teeth after a party because he was super out of it but hated the taste in his mouth. We put him on a mattress to sleep, and I got a new toothbrush with a little bit of toothpaste, and gently brushed his teeth as he was laying there, smashed. I then put a water bottle and bucket next to him, and he fell asleep like a baby. Also, important advice, if you're helping a drunk person go to bed, make sure you put them in the lateral sleep position. They lay on their side, and you can use pillows to put up against their back, and belly to make sure they stay put. If they lay on their back and chuck up during their sleep, they could choke or drown. There was this cheap bachelor party adult toy that melted in my bedside drawer after my AC in my room broke for a week, but I didn't know that until I got my hand stuck in it in front of a guy who was asking me out. I opened the drawer and reached in looking for my chapstick while we were talking, and to my absolute horror, I couldn't pull my hand back out. It was completely stuck to something. Turns out that a fake silicone vibrating toy I got as a gag gift melted around the 3 other real silicone ones and then started to cure again. It was like a half-dry superglue, but shaped like a 4-headed male organ. It looked weaponized, and crucially, it was stuck to my fricking hand. The guy tried to help me, but he just ended up getting his hands on it too. We had to take turns spraying each other with scalding hot water to get it off. I've never been so mortified in my life. Needless to say, we never saw each other again. I grew up in a rural area with dial-up internet. I was only able to load undressed images from the top down. I finished before it loaded past the neck. I guess my thing is a pretty face and a beautiful, happy smile. Did the deed in a car park and a passing driver tried to high-five me. Still haunts me, to be honest. I was a teenager who was out of control. I dug a zucchini-sized hole in the ground, filled it with axle grease, and banged it. And 9 months later, Lightning McQueen was born. I just started discovering myself fairly early and was starting to watch prawns. I was already craving to know what one of those male appendages felt like inside of me, but the closest thing I had to the shape of one was a hairbrush with a circular handle. So with this, I went to town until I got tired. About 2 weeks later, I was due for my period, but it was late and I immediately started freaking out thinking I was pregnant. I decided to tell my mother, bawling my eyes out, apologizing for being pregnant, which confused my mum quite a bit, I can tell you. It was about 30 minutes later that my mum had to re-explain how doing the deed worked and how hairbrushes don't get you pregnant. Doing the deed with my wife, then girlfriend, in the back of my car when a bright light shines in the window. The cop asks, "What's going on here?" And I calmly respond, "We're just doing the deed, sir." He was nice, told us it was technically public exposure, and it would be best if we just hightailed it out of the parking lot. My high school boyfriend and I were doing the deed in his attic bedroom, both of us completely undressed. I was bouncing and moaning and making a lot of noise with the headboard because we were home alone. Well, his mum came home early and we had no idea until she was at the top of the stairs calling his name and walked in on me completely undressed and riding her son. She took a breath, calmly told us to get dressed and come downstairs. When we did, she told us she was very disappointed and asked him to walk me home. He very quietly told her we'd planned to go to church youth group afterwards. She let us leave after she picked her jaw up off the floor. That was the first time I met his mother. Well, to be fair, most teens who go to youth group talk the talk but don't walk the walk and get up to as much nocturnal activity as they would have anyway regardless, so I can only think it was funny that you got caught this way. When I was a teenager, I was obsessed with Nirvana. I had all of their albums, a bunch of shirts, and a bunch of books, including a couple of conspiracy theory books about him being murdered. Anyway, I got grounded and had all technology taken away from me. One day I was super in the mood and having trouble whacking it without prawns. I was mid-whack when I remembered that there was, for some frickin' reason, a photo in one of the conspiracy books of Courtney Love's exposed chest. For 2 weeks straight, sometimes multiple times a day, I whacked the mule to Courtney Love's tots in black and white. Shameful. I have vitiligo, meaning patches of my skin have no melanin at all. It's not very noticeable as I'm fairly light-skinned, and except for a couple of patches on my hands, it's mostly on my member. When I was maybe 15, a girl I had a crush on noticed the patches on my hands and asked me about it. I explained what it was and she asked if I had it elsewhere. I answered, as I said, it's mostly on my eggplant. She kind of chuckled and said, "So it looks like a cow?" I said, "Yes, it does in fact look like a cow." She said, "I'd love to see it." I said, "Yeah, it's weird," turned around and walked away, completely and entirely oblivious. I used to read some weird smut when I was younger, as I hated all prawns in video form. I distinctly remember reading one that had women in stalls like cows. They kept using the term "who cow," which at the time I didn't realize was obviously a mashup of the word human and cow. I didn't think much of it, but one time I was talking to a friend and trying to remember the term for a female cow. My brain thought "who cow" and I almost said it before catching myself. I know they probably wouldn't have caught on, but it killed me inside that I almost said something from some pretty weird smut from the internet. I once tried to smack a girl's butt when she was riding me, and I whacked myself square in the sack. It made an audible thwack, and we had to stop for a bit while I doubled over in pain. We had a good laugh about it, but I really thought my aim was better than that. Ladies, when did you regret saying no to a guy who asked you out? My grandma just told me one of these. In high school, she met this guy. He was very intelligent, fairly good-looking, and greatly humorous. She really liked him, and she was very aware that he liked her as well. So one day, he finally asks her out, and she rejects him. My grandma continues to say about how he turned out so well with money and a really nice life. So naturally, I asked, "Well, why did you reject him?" And her exact words were, "Well, I couldn't date a ginger." Old people. The best part is she ended up having a red-headed son anyway. One time I said no because I was too busy with my exams. I had my head buried in my books when he asked me. The timing was just all wrong. I regret saying no. Dude, the ball's in your court at that point. What's wrong with asking him out once you're not in finals anymore? If a girl tells me she's busy but maybe sometime in the future, while giving no specific timeline, I assume that's code for "I'm not interested." If it's not code, you have to be the one to broach the subject again. I'm not going to keep pestering you. I've learned my lesson. Had a guy ask me out in high school. Really fun guy. Very nice, funny, athletic, smart, and good-looking. I turned him down because I knew he'd already done the deed with someone, and I wasn't ready to do it at the time. It wasn't about his morals. I did desperately want to date him, but I just felt like I'd never be able to make him happy, and I was embarrassed that I hadn't had that experience yet. A few years later in college, I ran into him when I was home on break. He's still the perfect guy, hasn't changed a bit. I really screwed the pooch on that one. Had a very close friend in high school who really liked me for years. I was his prom date and all, but when he started to want to be more than friends, I was really hesitant. So I said no and distanced myself, even though I should have said yes, I know. Long story short, I'm a Sikh, and I was rebelling against my parents' wishes to be with a practicing Sikh. Such a stupid reason. We stayed friends though. In college, I started to like him even more, but we both had significant others. I kept thinking of telling him how I felt, but I kept these feelings in my head all throughout college without saying anything, and instead I stayed with my D-bag of a boyfriend. Then when I was getting close to admitting everything to him, he passed away while on vacation with his family. In 4th grade, a boy passed me a note asking me whether I'd be his girlfriend, and to circle yes or no. I was caught off guard, but my friend sitting next to me wasn't. I believe she said, "Ew, rip it up," and I did. He was a nice kid. I should have circled yes, and I really shouldn't have ripped it up. That was very rude of me. Sorry, Jeremy. Poor Jeremy. Oh well, hopefully he eventually found someone less dependent on their friends' whims at the time. Although, as that other person wrote earlier, there is nothing wrong with coming to your senses later and asking someone who you know likes you. Well, 2 guys come to mind. Guy 1 was so sweet and I did like him, but he was going too fast for my liking, saying "I love you" too soon and stuff. He somehow lost heart in pursuing a relationship with me when I told him to slow down as it was making me uncomfortable. We rekindled our thing a few years later, but it wasn't quite the same and it didn't amount to anything serious. He's now in a long-distance relationship with a beautiful girl. From what I can see from the outside of their relationship, he's very sweet and a devoted boyfriend. I sometimes think I missed out. Guy 2 was someone I really liked, but he was always talking to or about other girls, so I didn't think he liked me that much. One day, he asked if I'd go out with him, but it was set up to seem like a joke, so I said, "No, that's ridiculous," because I didn't want to appear too eager and vulnerable. I found out later he was serious but wanted to seem casual. He had moved on to other girls by the time I found out, and went into a relationship with this other person. She was his first girlfriend. When they broke up, it devastated him. Then, sometime after, we got together. I was his rebound, so it was doomed from the start as he wasn't over her. I thought if I'd said yes to him when he asked me the first time, I would have been his first and he would have loved me much more. This happened in high school, hence all of these stupid games and predictions. Oh, don't worry, those stupid games can go well into adulthood. I did this event at the Queen Mary and I could not stop staring at this guy. I just thought he was the most gorgeous thing on the planet. My event coordinator noticed and ended up bringing him over the last night when they had a ball. We walked around the deck, and when I told him about how earlier I'd slipped and almost fell, he swooped me into a dip and said, "Like this?" He tried to teach me how to dance, which he was great at, told me about how he'd traveled and loved school and all the same things as me. It was the best and most romantic night of my life. I had to go back to my group, and he stopped me on the stairs to kiss me and said, "This is the last chance I'm going to get to do this. What do you want me to do?" I told him I needed him to keep walking because at the time I was in an on and off again relationship with a total scumbag. I think about him all the time and beat myself up a lot for passing on someone so great for someone who didn't care about me at all. If I could redo one thing in my life, it would be that night. Damn it. I know I'm a complete idiot. He was unreal in how wonderful he was. Yes, I fully admit to being that girl who picked up the D-bag, but it was my first relationship and lesson was definitely learned. After stewing on this and beating myself up a bit, I think I'm going to try and find him. He has a pretty uncommon name, luckily. Last I heard he had a girlfriend, but we'll see. Crappy mental health, didn't feel like I could have a healthy relationship because of it. Back in my teens, my self-esteem was so low that it was easier to believe otherwise really nice guys were trying to make fun of me rather than they were actually interested. Some of them were nice guys I had crushes on for years. Yay me. I don't really regret this one, but I wish I'd been someone else that could have given him a chance. He was all shy and cute and seemed like a genuinely good person. It was in the train. But I was and am in love with somebody else. Well, there was this one guy who served at the register I was working, who seemed nice and normal. He came back later and handed me his number, and I sort of wondered what would have happened if I'd called it. I lost the number, but I remember his name, and I know he probably lives in the area. Yeah, I know how working the register is. A girl once wrote "call me" on her receipt after she signed it and handed it back to me, but she forgot to put her number on it, so I just threw it away. Wasted opportunity. Haha, she was so nervous she forgot your number? Aww. It was freshman year of college. I made eye contact with some random guy from across the quad. He walked over, sat next to me, and we had a short conversation. He invited me to his room before my friends showed up and dragged me away. Turns out we lived in the same building. I went to his room and we talked and joked as though we'd known each other our entire lives. And constantly, this kick-butt engineer student was complimenting me, the mediocre biology kid, on how smart I was. He and I ran into each other several times, and there was always a palpable tension between us. But I was in a long-distance relationship at the time, and I never went for it. I turned down the only guy to ever give me butterflies in my stomach and make me smile like an idiot. This is tangential because he never asked directly, like he hinted at it enough that I really should have gotten the picture, but I wasn't thinking about starting anything because I was moving 4 states away in less than a week. It's 3 months later, and I still think about what could have been sometimes. My main motivation for acquiring fame and wealth and muscles is to put a lot of girls into the situation you're describing. That's healthy, right? My mum was waiting for this guy to get off stage so she could interview him for Buddy magazine, when this weird little guy comes over and asks her out. Her actual words were, "He was way too ugly, I was just too good for him," after I asked her why she shut him down. So anyway, this guy turned out to be Stevie Ray Vaughan. She said that when the guy she was waiting for finally got off stage, the little guy got up and did a couple of songs. She instantly regretted treating him like that and tried to talk to him afterwards, and he told her, "I wasn't good enough for you before I played, and nothing's changed." Cue me and everyone else watching jumping on our keyboards so we can Google Stevie Ray Vaughan and rate him based on attractiveness. I mean, I'd give him a solid 6 out of 10, but I wager that changes when you see him play on stage and in his element. I worked for several years with a gentleman who we'll call Harry. We had a lot of fun at work and also went out surfing, beach days, mutual friends stuff together too. Only gradually did I realize I was developing genuine feelings for him. I kept all of this to myself, of course. He seemed way out of my league and I didn't want to make our work relationship awkward. Once he asked me if I'd go shopping with him to find some shoes. We went to the mall, found some kicks, and then he asked me if I wanted lunch. I said, no, I wanted to work out before work, so see you later. Didn't understand he was maybe asking me to lunch as a date until much later. Idiot. We continued to work together and hang out as friends though, and we both dated other people. Eventually, he left the job to travel and finish school, but still came by to hang out. One night we were all drinking and we went out back to share a smoke. We were pretty drunk, and I was sitting on this raised box thing, and he stood in front of me, placed his hands on my knees, looked into my eyes and said, Julia, I love you. I've never been able to say this before. I love you. I've loved you a long time. And I said, okay, handed him the smoke and went back inside. I didn't know how to reply. I had inklings that he had feelings for me before, but we never came out and said it. I had a boyfriend at the time and wouldn't cheat, so here I am. Harry, if you read this, I love you too. In short, worked for years with my possible soulmate, he confessed his love and I choked like a fool. Today I learned that girls will still say no to being asked out even if they like you and are available. So remember, no matter how much you think she likes you, asking her out is still just like starting a hardest difficulty game of Minesweeper on the smallest map. At an end of summer party, this nice guy gave me his number. I was very shy and kept putting off calling him because I was nervous. Then I got caught up in the excitement of starting my first year at university and I honestly just forgot about it. Passed him months later in the hallway at university and he gave me this incredibly wounded puppy dog look and kept walking. I felt terrible. I hadn't thought it was a big deal for him. I know now it's pretty much always a big deal for a guy to work up that sort of courage. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In high school, I had a huge crush on this one guy, but he was one of the popular guys and I wasn't. But as luck would have it, we sat beside each other in sophomore English, and he must have thought I was pretty funny because he was laughing at all my jokes. Fast forward to the end of the year, he and his girlfriend broke up, and after class we held hands all the way to the bus stop. I was so frickin' shy that I bolted when he tried to kiss me. We didn't talk much afterwards, and I regret being shy. I guarantee nobody is ever happy about how shy they once were. I said no to a perfectly lovely guy who was just my type once because I was feeling a bit down and not like I could deal with a world of romance. I mentioned this to my best friend in passing one day, and it transpired that they knew each other. My best friend managed to dig me out of my shell enough to at least go out for a quick drink with him. 2 years later, I walked down the aisle towards him. We're now fulfilling a lifelong dream of mine by living in another country together and have a life full of love and adventure planned. Obviously, I'd never have known this to regret it, but it's incredible to think how different my life would be if I'd stuck with my original no. Is anyone else watching this hoping to find one about yourself? Every single person, yes. He was a skater boy. I said, see you later, boy. In college, there was a guy who asked me out who was weird and annoying, so I said no. Next year, he came back hot as F. Turns out he spent all summer working out. I regretted it until I invited him over one night and he stole my PS3 and my Yoda backpack. I'll add that I got the backpack back. He was roommates with a friend of mine. He actually wore the backpack around the next day and everyone knew it was mine. I feel like the worst part was the aftermath. I invited him over to hang out, and once I was reminded of his weirdness, I sent him on his way. Then the next day, he told everyone we'd hooked up and wore the backpack as proof. I was known as the campus hussy, and he sold the PS3 and took out my roommate on a date. I have never said no to a guy that asked me out in a polite and respectful way. Obama asked me out when we were in high school. I thought he was too skinny and I let him down by saying, "You have more chance of becoming president than getting in my pants." Turns out he became president to impress you and prove that he's willing to do anything for you. One of these days he'll show up at your house with a bouquet of beautiful flowers and gifts. He'll tell you how he never really loved Michelle and that you were the only person he could ever see himself with. I'd imagine that, after dating for a few years, you'll go through a rough patch that will end with a kiss in the rain at a train station with a proposal. So, I'm actually the guy in this story, but once I asked a girl in chem lab out at college. Turned out she had a boyfriend, but her smile when I asked her was bigger than I've seen from girls who said yes. I, a female, used to work at a big concert arena. It was a terrible job and my personal relationship was really on the rocks, so my daily life wasn't the greatest at the time. But one night this guy came up to me and said, "I just wanted to tell you that you're the most beautiful person here. Would you maybe want to go out sometime?" Which is so freaking sweet. but I turned cherry apple red and I didn't know what to say, so I turned him down. My relationship, with a total moron, might I add, failed within days of that, and I quit my job soon after. Things are great for me now. I'm with someone wonderful, but I occasionally think of that guy and how much hearing that impacted me. I hope he found someone awesome too. Remembering the people who give us these genuine compliments and how they moved us at the time can be a very good way for a quick confidence injection down the line, and actually help us in the long run more than people realize sometimes. I'm glad that it impacted you. He didn't ask me out, but we were super close. It was obvious that we both liked each other until my friends and I were playing a game where you'd have to say who you preferred to date more in the group of friends. It was my turn, and I jokingly said a different guy. Of course, he was so shocked, and it was only a few days later that I realized my dumb mistake. I was so frustrated at myself that I didn't talk to him for a long time. We talk a bit now, but he has a girlfriend. So much regret. In short, don't be afraid to tell the truth. I do realize that this was one of the dumbest mistakes I've ever made. I understand that some of you guys feel that I'm rude and stupid, and I can't argue with you there. On the other hand, I'm considering telling him, but I'm afraid that it'll spread like crappy gossip. Anyway, thanks for listening. I had a really good male friend in high school who, to put it lightly, got around a lot. We were really close. He'd tell me everything about his escapades with a variety of girls, some of whom I knew and some of whom were much older. Despite all of these conversations, I started to fall for him. Underneath his reputation was someone kind and loving to all his friends. He was the type who'd do anything for anyone. He was a great father figure to his younger siblings and was essentially the man of the house. Junior year, he revealed that he was starting to like me. He asked if I would be his date to our friend's annual New Year's party. But I was an assuming, ignorant witch, and I brushed it off. I was hurt that he'd try to get in my pants. I thought I meant more to him than just another girl to mess around with. I never told him how I felt about him. Instead, I cut off ties and started to distance myself from him little by little with no explanation. He would try to talk to me, but I'd try my hardest to avoid him altogether. I went away to college and he stayed in our hometown. After too much time thinking, I realized that what I did was immature. Recently, we started talking again, and I apologized for being a huge witch. He told me he knew I'd come around again, but I'm happy to know he really does care for me still. He doesn't know it, but I'm going to go back home tonight for Christmas. I plan on surprising him. I'm going to ask him to be my date to the New Year's Eve party our friend has every year. Update: he already knew where the conversation was heading, the cocky jerk, and said yes. I'm so lucky things have fallen into place. I can't wait to see where things take us, and thanks everyone for your support. Well, I met a beautiful Italian architect when I was studying abroad. He kept in touch over Facebook. As soon as I was single again, he sent me a message telling me he'd pay for my flights to Vienna where his parents live. Then we'd move to his flat in Paris. I said no, my education was too important. He got married to a gorgeous Russian girl a couple of months later. Their wedding was something straight out of a fairy tale. I would make the same decision again, but damn, do I wonder what my life would be like. Wait, he married a couple of months later? As soon as he was single, he contacted you, went straight to offering to pay for a plane ticket, got married just a couple of months ago? You can stop wondering. You'd have had a fairy tale wedding, had crazy bedroom life for a few months, got into big fights because he's too passionate or emotional, and you probably are too since you regret saying no. You'd destroy all the dishes by throwing them on the ground and finally divorce. Then he'd probably rekindle with a certain Russian friend. Long story short, you've probably dodged a bullet, and don't be surprised if you hear from him in 2 years. A friend of mine has this cousin who I thought was top-tier frickin' gorgeous for years. I always told my friend how handsome I thought he was, but I never really spoke to him, and he never paid me much attention, so I figured he wasn't interested. Relatively recently, he broke up with a girl he was dating, and spent a while just hanging around me and hitting on me. I'm in a serious relationship, so it wasn't going to happen, and he knew that. But all I could think was, where the frick was this a while back? I totally regret not being able to say yes after that long. Way back in middle or high school, kids didn't really ask kids out. But I did hear that a kid had a crush on me, and my response was less than inviting. So nothing ever came of that, naturally. Fast forward 10 years later, and now I find him very attractive, wishing I'd been more open to his crush back then. Now he's married, and I'm sitting in single girl sweatpants in my apartment. Maybe I'd be in my married girl sweatpants in my villa if I hadn't been such a prude back then. A guy asked out a girl I work with a while back. She said no, very rudely. She's very materialistic. Certainly a gold digger. That guy ended up being Luke Wilson, tight end for the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. She is very regretful. One night, a long time ago on Facebook Messenger, a boy asked me out. I was just under 2 months into my freshman year of college. He was still in high school, so I said no. I couldn't do the long distance, nor did I want to be tied down or feel guilty with all the partying. We still hang out a few times a year, yet we never bring up that conversation. Nope. When I was younger, I said yes to everyone I was even remotely attracted to, and subsequently got to be an expert at extricating myself from any sort of relationship. Eventually, it got to be too much hassle, and I just allowed myself to be single for a good long while. Because I just didn't want to have to dump or get dumped or tell my stories to even one more new person. I did, however, have a big regret about dumping this one guy. We're actually dating again, but it's been more than 25 years since we dated the first time. So much time lost. No, I can't say I said no to anyone who asked. Did I wish I'd just grabbed that brown-eyed idiot who was in all of my classes and told them how I felt? Yes, with my whole being. I had a boyfriend and we were in the early happy stage of the relationship. I went to leave for work one day and was waiting at a bus stop when a guy crossed the street to come ask me out. I said something dumb like, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." Soon after that, the boyfriend I had made me realize he wasn't the right person for me. I was a housekeeper back then, and people tend to give the housekeeper liquor at Christmas. I had a very nice collection going on, put about 12 bottles on top of the fridge. My boyfriend drank them all within a week. I broke up with him because I just wasn't down for alcoholism. I always wished I'd said yes to the guy at the bus stop because he'd clearly been someone interesting and kind. But years went by, I met my husband, and now I'm not interested in anyone else. What secret did you hide from your spouse that nearly wrecked your relationship? I hid that I was $10,000 in debt. Before we were together, I made great money, had few living expenses, and the world was good. Paid cash for almost everything. While dating, I'd buy her gifts regularly or we'd go out to dinner and a show. I had a project car that I worked on constantly. Once we got married and bought a house, had kids, etc., living expenses went up, but my wages didn't go up as much. Don't get me wrong, we were paying the bills, but there just wasn't as much disposable income. Over time, I continued living the way I had been, with gifts, projects, guy toys and stuff, and slowly debt started to rack up. Most of it went on credit cards, and when she asked me where I was getting things, it was usually that I bought them used or traded something else or that I'd saved up. All my direct deposits went to my bank account. I had sources of income from work bonuses when I was on call that I wouldn't tell her about and send off to the cards to keep them off my back. Since this wasn't a regular source of income, I was always dreading a phone call asking where this month's payments were. One night, such a call came and I didn't pick up the phone. But my wife did. It was concerning a late payment to a card that my wife didn't know about. They wouldn't tell her the balance on the card for privacy reasons, but the cat was pretty much out of the bag. To some, $10,000 may not sound like a lot of money, and to us at that time it really wasn't. It was the loss of trust, the hiding, the lying, and the cloak and dagger of it all. Selling stuff on eBay to get money to make minimum payments. We did work through it, and it made our marriage stronger. We made a plan to fix things financially and worked together on my spending issues. It took time to rebuild the trust, but I still to this day wish I would have told her sooner or never let it happen in the first place. My boyfriend hid his niche bedroom interest from me. He likes to be watched while he strokes it. I found out when I googled his username and webcam sites came up for him. He said he didn't consider it cheating, so I guess it falls into this category. We talked about it and I suppose it's mostly better, but I still have trouble trusting him now. The stupidest thing is that if he'd been open and honest, we could have explored our options together, but he was too ashamed. We'd talked about what we were into before because I have some things of my own, so that's why this was so surprising and hurtful to me. We've moved on, but every now and then I think about it and it still bothers me a bit. He told me he kept it from me because he felt it would upset me. It only upset me because he kept it from me. The story's lesson here is to be open and honest with your significant other, even if you're embarrassed. Okay, so reading some of the other answers, I can only think, my God, I am so lame. The only thing that I kept from my wife was the fact that I was letting a local stray cat in the house. Our lease stipulates no pets. My hope was that when we could move in a couple of years, we'd take the cat with us. My wife came home earlier than expected one day and was angry that I not only let the cat in the house, but that I let it on the bed. Well, this is more cute than anything, which is why I'm giving myself this mini break of wholesomeness before what is likely to be a deluge of hurt feelings and shameful secrets. So actually, I'm the mad spouse. My husband and I split bills. One thing he takes care of is insurance on the house and car. We pay the insurance a year at a time, so we went into the agency, got it all taken care of, and paid in full. About 8 months later, a huge hailstorm came through town, and the siding, roof, and our cars got beat to crap. I called the insurance company, and they said they'd cancelled our policy back in January. Apparently, they'd tried to contact my husband, but he's bad at returning phone calls and opening his mail because, quote, he didn't want to deal with it. They needed some extra documentation, which was never provided, so they charged us a fee, which was never paid, and then they dropped us. So, we're personally on the tab for $9,000 in damages to our property, and it took months to find an insurance company willing to insure us since we've been without for more than 60 days. We have to pay high premiums on everything for the next year. I've never been so angry about anything in my entire life, and seriously thought about ending the marriage. I'm still annoyed when I think about it, but now I just take charge of opening our mail and keeping on top of things. The house siding won't get fixed for a while and the cars will stay dented, but the roof is done and the windows are finally repaired. Baby steps. I've never told my spouse just how much my hobby really costs. I was offered a substantial amount of money for my company, and I turned it down in the same conversation. It would have been a windfall of cash, but there were stipulations that I was not willing to agree to. The offer was from a friend and ex-employer. His company was a similar business and at least 5 times my size. The biggest caveat was that if I went with the deal, I'd have to agree to 10 years of employment. So, I'd still be running my company, as well as working for the larger company. There would have been tremendous pressure on me to show a return on the investment. That's where morals come in. There's more money to be made by wading into the grey areas of the law and occasionally crossing the line of legality. That was a major reason I left that company and started my own in the first place. I went home and told my wife about it, and she was deeply hurt that I didn't include her in the decision. I saw it as simply another business decision like I make every day without her input. Had I been offered more money up front, with the ability to walk away from it and retire, I probably would have consulted my wife, only because I would have struggled with the decision then. And it wouldn't even have been the first time I asked her advice about a business decision I needed input on. But yeah, she's annoyed with me for that one. My ex was one of those legit, crazy, overthinking, overanalyzing types that gets super jealous real quick. Anyway, I was in my last semester of college and going for my degree in secondary education. I was student teaching. My birthday is in early September, which is obviously during the school year, and one of my students got me a little coffee mug as a present. I loved it and thought it was so sweet. When I excitedly showed my ex, she freaked out and accused me of flirting and fooling around with my students. Yeah. Fast forward a couple of months and I was just about to graduate and leave student teaching. On my last day, several of my students got me farewell presents, ranging from letters to pens to a really nice tie. I hid all of it. Every single thing, because I knew what would happen if my partner found out. That in itself is really messed up, but I was disillusioned and, quote, in love at the same time. Either later that night or sometime shortly after, I was on the phone with my mum while my ex was in the room with me. I told my mum about all of the nice things my students got for me. Needless to say, my ex heard and freaked out again. It got ugly and I ended up feeling like I did something wrong for accepting the gifts. She was telling me how all of her friends thought it was super shady as well, which made me feel even worse. It was a messed up time. I'm so glad we aren't together anymore. That relationship made me insecure in the worst ways. And now I make a point of posting every gift I receive to my social media accounts just to show off. I took it upon myself to be in charge of the finances because I was raised that it was my manly duty to take care of the household. My girlfriend wasn't working at the time because we had 2 young kids, and we were both happy with her staying home and taking care of them. So I was the only income. It was minimum wage for a while until I got a job at a new restaurant that was doing very well. I was making 3 times what I was making before, and things were really starting to look up for us. We were finally off assistance and got to move out of our ghetto shack into a nice townhouse. I bought a new car with my bad credit that got me a horrible interest rate. We bought some shiny new furniture because now we had room. And then life kicked me in the gonads. The local economy tanked right around the time that some major chain restaurants opened up in our small town. Business took a huge dive and both my hours and my tips dropped off considerably. Now I was stuck with rent that was suddenly too high, a car payment that I should never have taken on, and I still had horrible credit, meaning that I had nothing to fall back on in case of an emergency. Then I got the bright idea that a payday loan would be a great idea. Not so much. This wouldn't have really been an issue except that I'd never shared any of this with my girlfriend. I took the burden on myself and tried to hide all of the financial struggles from her because I felt like a failure. I wasn't able to provide for my family. This, of course, led to countless arguments about me not treating her like an equal. She told me that it hurt her that I wouldn't communicate with her or share the burden. I'd make an effort for a couple of weeks, then go back to keeping quiet. It was about pride for me. It got to the point that I dreaded the mail coming. I feared the phone. The only thing we got in the mail was bills that I couldn't afford, and the only people that called were collection agencies or the bank, asking when I'd be making my out-of-control car payment. I didn't understand at the time what a true partnership was. Most of the stress at the time wasn't from the other end of the phone line, it was fear of her finding me not good enough. All she wanted was to share the burden. She didn't look down on me because we were struggling financially, she was hurt that I was trying to do it without her. It took a long few years to scratch back, and I could never have done it on my own. I just wish that I'd taken her words to heart sooner. It would have been much easier. Sounds like a horrifically tough time for any couple to go through, but full credit to both of you on pulling through it and coming out with a better relationship and ways to deal with problems going forward. Wow. I hid that I quit my job and wasn't fired. Also, I was scared to tell him my coworker had attempted the unspeakable act on me. I told him 2 or 3 days later, and he and my parents convinced me to call the police. I was scared he'd think I'd cheated or something, or that it was my fault. We got that guy put behind bars though, and I'm glad I told him. A 15-year smack addiction. I made decent money for the first 14 years or so I was able to hide it. I got laid off, so the money got tight. However, my addiction wasn't concerned with my lack of funds. I started selling all that was mine and then all that was my family's. It only got worse from there until the authorities got involved. Something I hid from my ex-wife was that I liked stuff in the butt, like beads and whatnot. I found out this little thing about myself while I was with her because she wouldn't do the deed with me for long periods of time, so I started exploring into how I could satisfy myself and not cheat. When she found out, she made fun of me and shamed me every chance she got. We didn't get divorced because of that, but it hurt a lot to be shamed by the only person I had in the world at the time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. We aren't married, but we do live together. Anyway, he's a super healthy, crunchy yoga addict. We have no meat in the house and basically live off rice and beans. So, whenever he's gone out of town for work, I'm home alone, baby. I'll order pizza delivery. The box will be in the trash can by the time he gets back. I also go to drive-thrus on the sly. I throw everything away so my car doesn't smell and he doesn't know. Receipts and all. No evidence. I do feel kind of guilty, but we don't have joint accounts or anything like that. I never promised to give up meat or certain foods, so I guess I'm not lying to him. Do you eat hamburgers? What? No, hiccups Onion Breath. I pay my way just fine, so I figure what I do with my money is my business, right? My husband was extremely stressed out and his poor mum needed $2,000 that we couldn't help with. So, without telling him, I went around to local stores and worked out a deal selling cookies and brownies to raise some money for his mum. I didn't tell my husband about it. I wanted to get the money first. I didn't want him thinking all day about if the cookies and brownies sold. When he found out, he flipped his crap, saying I was sneaking around behind his back and how dare I. I really thought I was doing something good. I should mention that this all happened about 5 or 6 years ago. At the time, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, had went from working every day to being disabled and it messed him up for a while. He thought he was no longer a man. I knew nothing about pride and ego and all of that stuff, and he just wasn't dealing with it in the best ways. He made me feel like scum. It went on for about a month until one night I just couldn't take it anymore. While crying my eyes out, I told him that since I was such a horrible person, then the best thing for him was to leave and find someone better. He could either leave me or get over it. I couldn't handle being yelled at every day anymore. Somehow, we worked it out, but son of a witch, it was really hard. Now we have a great marriage and we've learned how to be a real team. I tell him everything, even the things he doesn't want to know. I quit smoking a few years ago. I'd smoked for like 7 years and it was just time. My wife was my girlfriend back then. Anyway, I started to have serious issues at work and was struggling with a lot of stuff, and I just cracked and brought a pack of cigs. One thing led to another, I lost my job and all that crap, and I started smoking again, but hiding it from her. I didn't want to let her down, and I think for the most part I was just ashamed. Anyway, she totally busted me smoking, and I came clean about it, and she was really angry. Obviously, she started on the whole, "What else are you hiding from me?" thing. I don't know how to ease her mind and I feel really bad. I hope she'll come around and forgive me for hiding it. I failed last semester at school. I didn't want to tell him because we had vacation planned in May that he was really looking forward to because of his stress from work. I also knew he couldn't wait for me to graduate because he wanted to move. It was such a big deal to him and I couldn't face disappointing or upsetting him. After vacation, there was a wedding we had to attend, so I planned to tell him after that. Then we had a concert to go to that we'd bought tickets for with friends the winter before. I kept putting it off because by now it had been months since I didn't share the information. Obviously, the best time to tell him about my screw-up was in the beginning, but I didn't. When I finally told him the new semester was starting and he was still under the impression that I was going to school. But I wasn't because I had to wait a semester per school policy. I finally told him and now, after 4 years, we're no longer together. I seriously screwed that one up. The secret came from a man I was dating with serious intent a few years ago. When I met him, I knew he was a bit down on his luck and had had run-ins with the law. He said he was a changed man and just wanted to provide for his family by working a normal job. He was working in construction, seemed to be doing well, and we were happy. A few months into our relationship, I got an acceptance letter to college out of the province. We decided to try to do the long-distance thing, and off I went. About 2 weeks after I moved away, I got a call from my brother. He told me he had been spending time with this mutual friend of mine and my boyfriend's, and he, my brother, was worried about me. Apparently, my boyfriend had just been released from jail prior to us getting together. He was basically jailed for large-scale substance and human trafficking. Also, he was still actively pimping people out and was trying to get me on the hook so he could pimp me out as well. To say I was shocked is an understatement. Needless to say, I never spoke to that boyfriend again. After over 10 years of marriage and 2 kids, I had a drastic change in religious conviction, from born-again Christian to agnostic. It took 1 full year before I told her, or anyone else in my life for that matter. I live in the Bible Belt and being a believer was a firm part of my identity. It's been a year since I told her and it has been tough. She's gone from considering leaving to acceptance. I've told probably 7 or 8 other people in my life. My brother is the only one in my family that actually knows, but I've been feeling it's about time to change that. I won't mind the questions or challenges, they'll be much better than my lies or omissions. So, who wrote this question? Nice try, wife. Nice try. I draw and animate cartoon smut for a living. I pretend to be a freelancer to everyone that knows me in real life. As a working voice actor, from time to time you get auditions for R-rated material coming up, and honestly, I've done a few auditions but never got the roles. And although I'd have the same policy as you when it came to generally telling my friends that I was a voiceover and not going into specifics, I don't think I'd have any trouble telling my partner. Just gotta stop your parents from finding the really smutty stuff. I got a small raise a few months back, which equated to something like an extra $70 per paycheck. I didn't tell her about it because I put it towards paying off the debt we have. If I told her, it would have been allocated to her screw-up of a brother. My partner had told me he got kicked out 3 or 4 times just for being a crap, jobless high school dropout and fighting with his parents. Turns out it was because he physically attacked his mother. I only found this out 2 years into our 3-year relationship after he started attacking me and his parents became aware. I found out from my parents who found out from his parents. It was kind of crushing. Oh, and that he still loved all of his exes and he fantasized about them. I found out about that through him talking in his sleep. Anyway, the biggest lie I kept from him was that I owned a credit card and I was about $1,500 in debt. Didn't tell him because he always took my money. My ex got really upset when he found out how much I flicked the old bean, especially after we'd done the deed. And that was a lot to deal with. It wasn't that he couldn't get me happy in the bedroom, but I'd get really into it for long after we'd done and would end up sneaking off all day just to have some more fun. We'd been together for about 2 years, so I can understand why hiding it would annoy him. I just didn't know it was a problem. I thought all women did this. I started collecting inflatables and doing the deed with them. My wife found out. We started doing the deed on the inflatables and kind of tripled our amount of bedroom time overnight. Now I sell custom inflatables as a side business and it looks like I can quit my day job real soon. I managed to hide my Pokemon addiction from my significant other for the first 6 months of our relationship. I don't think the word Pokemon was mentioned once in all of that time. I live and breathe Pokemon. I wrote my master's dissertation on it. Significant other thought she had found a nice, sensible person. Once we were serious and semi-settled down, it all came spilling out. I did my best to stagger the revelations, but once the floodgates opened up, there was no closing them. The worst was when I changed my Facebook display picture to the Pokemon trainer and refused to change it back. We're still happily together, and now I try to delay my Pokemon activities until after she's fallen asleep. When we were first married, we were poor as heck. I couldn't afford a big diamond, so instead I brought a little bit of gold bullion and had a friend, who had just graduated from dental school and had both the tools and the skill, make the gold into custom wedding rings. Fast forward 10 years and we're pregnant with our second child, and I want to do something really special for her. So I start saving a little from reimbursed travel expenses and from sales commission checks every month until I have what I think I need. So I decided to have a special ring commissioned and made especially for her. It has birthstones of our 2 children and a larger diamond, my birthstone, in the middle. My oldest child is 2, so I know her birthstone, and we have the approximate due date for the one we're expecting, so I'm pretty sure I know what his birthstone will be. I carefully chose loose stones for all 3 and then worked with a guy about an hour away from my home who makes custom jewelry to design the ring that will have all 3 stones in it in just the way I want them arranged. The jeweler makes it in time for the expected due date of our second, and I carry it everywhere in my pocket waiting for her to go into labor. The day comes, she delivers a healthy baby boy, joy ensues, happy, happy, happy. When she finally gets to go to a private room to rest and we have no visitors, I pull it out and give it to her, expecting tears of happiness. Instead, she says, "What the hell is that? Where did you get it? And how the holy hell did you pay for that?" I'm stunned, but stammer out that I've been putting a little money away for a while so I could surprise her. For the next few months, she was really angry at me for, quote, hiding money from her. This is filed under no good deed goes unpunished. She used this incident for years as proof that I was deceitful and untrustworthy. Frick my life. We were divorced a few years later. This kind of thing was a pattern with her. I bought flowers home for her one time for no special reason, and she complained a lot about how much they cost. We could easily afford them because they were like $20. Another time on our anniversary, I arranged a surprise overnight stay at a spa and resort with a popular restaurant attached. I'd taken care of an overnight babysitter, had checked into the room in advance so I had a key in my pocket, I tipped off the valet so he knew when we arrived for dinner that we'd actually be staying overnight, and I had flowers and champagne ready in the room before we arrived. She thought we were just going out to dinner and commented it would be fun to stay here sometime. I pulled out the key and said, "How about tonight? It's all arranged." And she was furious that I'd done all of this in prep, quote, behind her back, and accused me of trying to manipulate her into being obligated to do the deed. I absolutely was unable to do anything nice or romantic for this person I was married to for 18 years. What's the craziest last will and testament that you had to deal with? I worked at an attorney office and had a little old lady give her house and belongings to a bus driver. The bus driver was nice to her and would help her. We were all waiting for all heck to break loose when her family found out. They could maybe contest it on the basis of her mental health, but when I was a witness to the signing, she seemed fine and knew the answers to the questions, so she wasn't having severe mental problems as far as we could tell. If I recall correctly from my trusts and estates class, a better way to ensure someone gets nothing, the decedent should have something to the effect of, "I leave, family member name, my love," or give them a paltry sum like $1. "To son A, I give my house, to son B, I give my boat, and to son C, I give $1. Military lawman here. Had a young client come in for a will before deployment. He put in a request to be buried in blue jeans, a Chris Jericho t-shirt, and his replica WWE championship belt. Happily, this airman didn't meet any misfortune on his deployment. My brother used to be a paralegal, and he said that a group of 3 siblings, I believe 2 brothers and a sister, almost came to blows because the inheritance didn't divide into 3 evenly. There were 2 pennies left over. Not a lawyer, but a paralegal. We had a dying client in the hospital change her will by recording it on a smartphone. It set a precedent and made the local paper. The lawyer in question has the page from the newspaper framed in his office. When I was doing my upper year contracts course in uni, we covered a case where a farmer had gotten stuck under his tractor. He thought no one would find him in time, so he carved, "I leave it all to my wife," and it was deemed a legal last will and testament by the courts. I would imagine the phone recording would be the same. I'm not a lawyer, but I had an experience with this years ago. Rich uncle of mine, real crazy, and not in the good way. He'd come to visit us when we were kids, maybe once every 10 years. Last time he did, he brought us to a Denny's. He met my brother in an airport, was there for an hour before he got on another plane and went home. When he died, he had no friends. He'd driven his wife to basically drink herself to death a few years prior. He left his entire estate to an Elvis impersonator. Everything. Two sons of a really wealthy couple go to the family lawyer to have the will read. The lawyer is super nervous. He's known them both since they were kids. One son gets the entire inheritance and the other gets nothing. The explanation was that it should be passed through to the blood relative only. So that was the day the one son found out he was adopted. What garbage adoptive parents. I mean, why adopt a kid if you aren't going to treat them as your own? Although you could argue that maybe he at least got a good upbringing that way, the fact that they could be so callous about how he found out about it is pretty awful. I work for a lawyer who does wills. We've had a lady put in her will that one of her adult sons was not to receive his share until he visited a dentist, and the other son lost £70. Another lady put in her will that she wanted her cats cremated with her when she died. I told her that's not going to happen. Human remains and animals, dead or alive, do not get cremated at the same time. So she settled on being cremated separately and joined together, then buried together. Typically, wills are about 10 pages, for the average person. We had a lady who had a 56-page will. She detailed everything from her house to people. The wooden ladle goes to Agnes. The toilet paper holder goes to Tim. Magazine basket to John Paul II. For every single item in this lady's house. We had a man put in his will that his family was to go to the zoo immediately after his burial, that day. We thought that one was more heartwarming. We had a lady that told us to put in her will that she wanted to be buried on her property next to her husband. She lived on a small rural property. Totally illegal to have human remains buried there. Refused to tell us whether her husband was cremated or not and dictated that she did not want to be cremated. Her husband had died 5 or 6 years prior, so it's not as though it was 50 years where things like that might have been a little overlooked. We work with many people from a certain religion. A lot of people we do wills for leave at least 90% of their estates to the church instead of their families. The so-called Great Stork Derby was when a wealthy Canadian left a substantial amount of money to whichever woman had the most children in the 10 years following his death. It was upheld through numerous court battles, and 4 women tied with 9 children each. 2 women were also given smaller payouts. One had 10 children, 2 of whom didn't make it, and another had more than 9 kids, but a couple of those weren't with her husband, which was a grey area. The guy also had some other interesting things in his will and was a known practical joker. He willed the use of a vacation home in Jamaica to 3 lawyers known for hating each other's guts. Upon the eventual deaths of all of them, probably at the hands of each other, the proceeds from its sale were to be distributed among the poor of that city. Luckily for the 3 lawyers, he actually just decided to sell the house during his lifetime. One share of the O'Keefe Brewery Company was bequeathed to every practicing Protestant minister and Orange Lodge in Toronto. The brewery was a Catholic firm, and the man didn't actually own the stock he was giving away in his will, which ultimately made this clause moot. Would ministers who raged against demon rum pocket their principles long enough to make a grab for the stock? Would Orangemen take anything from the hated Catholics? Sadly, we never found out. I was in rehab with a guy whose grandmother left him $2.5 million if he could quit smack for 2 years. He'd have to wear one of those patches that the courts use for probations the entire time, which are exceptionally hard to fool. $2.5 million? Slam dunk, right? This was in 2007. The last time I saw him was in 2013, nodded the F out in a Fleabag motel while I left to pick up another baggie. I got arrested, made the decision to quit, and never saw him again. Who knows, maybe since then he's cleaned up. The local newspaper ran a story with pictures of a house that was left to a cat when the owner died. The cat was the only occupant. The woman's lawyer maintained the house for the cat from the deceased owner's trust fund. I always wondered if there might have been a little motivation to hasten Kitty's demise. Honestly, probably not if you get to charge billable hours to go feed a cat. That's a sweet gig and probably a nice break from office work. I can just see the letter now. Dear Mr. Tittles, I trust this finds you well. Please find below Beagle & Beagle's fees and costs for Junior Associate McSlavington attending to your matters. 2 hours researching current trends in cat food, $700. 1 hour travel from office to Whole Foods, $350. An hour's travel from Whole Foods to Mr. Tittle's residence, $350. 3.5 hours attending to the well-being of Mr. Tittles, $1,225. 6 minutes general admin on estate, research into animals as beneficiaries tax rules, petitioning state legislatures on amendment to tax code, consultation with Veterinarian Society of America on lobbying efforts, drafting letter to Congress as interested party on behalf of Mr. Tittles/VSOA, follow-up calls $35, disbursements, cat food $30, gas $5, total $2,695. We look forward to payment on our standard 30-day term and thank you again for choosing Beagle and Beagle for your legal services in this competitive market. Sincerely, Beagle Sr. There's a famous UK case. One of the richest men in the world at the time died during the journey between his solicitor and his country estate, all because he forgot his glasses. It took lawyers just over 100 years to spend the entire estate in legal fees. My dad is a lawyer, and a friend of my grandpa, who was in his 80s and had end-stage cancer, made his will. He was a big fan of weapons and wanted to give them to my dad, who's a fan as well. He left my dad 2 shotties, a Glock, and a revolver. My dad told him it would be better to write it in the will because my country's law says you can only own 5 weapons at a time. My dad already had 4 at the time, so he'd have to give some up, but if you inherit them, it doesn't add to the limit. So, they made a testament and he gave him the weapons except for the revolver, because apparently it was his favorite and he didn't want to give it away yet. My dad instantly knew why, but didn't say anything. 2 weeks later, the guy decided he didn't want to live through long, cancer-ridden deterioration and used the revolver to speed things along. My dad still hasn't gotten the weapon because the police still have it. He never told my grandpa that he knew he didn't want to take this guy's chance of finishing on his own terms instead of waiting for the cancer to win. I was witness to one where a lady wanted to make sure her daughter divorced her husband when she had no intentions of doing so. She'd have to do it if she wanted her part of the estate. Thankfully, that's not legally enforceable, so nothing came of it. My great-grandmother did this, left everything to her daughters and granddaughters. The will stated explicitly that they were to use the money to get a divorce. My mum was like, "I don't want a divorce?" And the lawyer was like, "Yeah, we can't enforce that. Here's your money." So my mum and my dad spent the money updating their house. There are very valid reasons why parents or onlookers might want someone they know to end a toxic marriage, but yeah, it turns out you can't force someone who doesn't make moves to leave it themselves. You can lay out your concerns, keep an eye on things, but legally, turns out there's not all that much you can do despite that. I mean, it's not that crazy, it's depressingly predictable. Rich old aunt, the only one in her huge family with any money, having been a doctor on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, she set up a living trust to take care of her poor relations in the Philippines, to continue as a death trust whenever she died. Her favorite niece was in control of the trust, and of course the niece was responsible and even-handed, and never embezzled any of the money to set herself up as a newspaper publisher and concert producer and media mogul with expensive new cars and lots of first-class Pan-Pacific travel. Nope, not that lady. Of course, the trustee did all of that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars missing, and an unholy mess of sifting through money transfers and property purchases in 3 countries. The niece also had a bigamous marriage to some guy in the Philippines, to whom she sent buckets of her aunt's money to build a luxury villa, while her legal husband in North America was bedridden and dying slowly. She vehemently denied such a relationship existed. She also had photos of her Philippines wedding on her Facebook page. Not the smartest embezzler out there. From where I sat, in the attorney's office representing the poor relations trying to stop the trustee's embezzlement, the craziest part of it all was that after years of fighting, we finally got complete financial disclosure for the trust on like December 22nd, and it was such a Christmas miracle that I almost put off my Christmas trip to New York City to gleefully pore through every poorly redacted line of it. Also, we had the rich old aunt's ashes sitting on our bookshelf for years, since the dispute about what to do with her remains was a part of this all. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Fairly new lawyer here, I haven't had that much in wills. Family is where the real fun is. But we did have a woman with dementia come in to do her will, then come in a few months later to change it because her condition was worsening. I did do a capacity assessment and she seemed to understand what her old will said and what her new will would say, and why she was changing it. She wasn't suddenly cutting anyone close out, so I made the changes she requested, told her okay, but I warned her that I might not be able to make future changes due to concerns about her condition. A week later she comes back in and she is in rough shape. She remembers me, but her eyes are watering, she has trouble explaining what's going on. I realize she's not even trying to change her will, she's just sort of here because she's scared about the changes in her head. So I get in touch with the person supposed to be caring of her. I talk over her will one more time, and I tell her she's done everything right, her will is safe, her family knows where it is, a few other things. When I said goodbye, I told her I hoped to see her again, and she smiled and said she didn't think we would. I teared up a little then. We'd laughed and chatted through her original will, discussed the best way to do things. Seeing this formerly confident and witty woman, still keeping it together but obviously so concerned, and knowing it was a one-way downward path, it just sucked. I don't know how she's doing now. I have a grandpa who set up his will to divide his estate between his and his wife's families. He remarried. Pretty normal so far, right? The stupid part is that rather than splitting his half between the 3 children, he did per capita to be distributed after his wife passed. So we currently have a 9-way split and likely to do 10 to 15 ways before it's actually settled. Where I went to college, there's an oak tree that was deeded to itself in a man's will. Now called the tree that owns itself, it sits in the middle of a road and you have to go to one lane to drive around it. The story is that a man loved the tree so much as a kid that around the time he died in the 1830s, he gave the tree possession of itself. This technically wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but the county and local populace has accepted it and takes care of it. The original tree actually died, and the current one is a product of one of the acorns of the original. Estate lawyer here. I could tell so many stories. Sisters fighting over deceased brother's dining room table, ending in an accusation that one had murdered her own husband. True believers who were convinced the rapture was imminent and only saw the value of completing their estate plan when I explained the mess those of us left behind would have to deal with, including their stuff. A guy who got married days before his death to a longtime girlfriend. It's a long story. He did a will, disinherited several kids but not all of them, and somehow everything worked out okay with minimal disagreement. Several stories where a family member is a lawyer who practices in another area of law in another state, or doesn't practice at all. Guaranteed craziness. I could go on and on. It's absolutely the best line of work. It's really fulfilling with great stories. You get to know families and walk meaningful paths alongside them. Not a lawyer, but when my dad was growing up, there was this little old lady across the street without any family. She was from Finland, and her husband died during World War II. She immigrated to the States and had nobody. So my grandparents would knock on her door to chat, take her grocery shopping, stuff like that. They made my dad and brother help out around the house and yard. She loved my dad and uncle, treated them like her own kids, with cookies and treats and presents. When my dad was in Vietnam, she'd record him voice messages on tapes and send them to him with letters, telling him what life was like in the neighborhood and how she'd hoped he'd be home safe soon, and that she prayed for him, stuff like that. When he came home, he'd stop by to chat and help out around the house, bring her macaroons, and just sit and talk for a while. One day, old Mrs. Lingard died, and a lawyer called my grandparents. She'd left them a sizable amount of cash and stock, and her paid-off house to my dad and his brother. My family had thought she was penniless. Never underestimate how much little, simple things can mean to people. You just might be one of the best things in their life. I saw a couple giving $100,000 to the next caretakers of their pets. I have a statement in mind saying that my sister will be awarded $10,000 to care for my cat if something happens to me. But that's just because he has a lot of medical issues and his vet bills can reach $1,000 pretty quick each time anything happens, and I don't want her going into debt taking care of my pet. I know that I should have a more real-life-based commentary, but all of these posts about people leaving stuff to their animals are just making me think of the Aristocats and how ridiculous that wealthy old lady was for leaving all her money to her cats. Her aging butler seemed relatively nice until he learned he was getting screwed, and might have been happy to look after them as a condition of the will if she left him something as well. Sorry, I'll quit focusing on cartoons from the 90s and get back to the task at hand. This family didn't realize I had nothing to do with the will. One kept telling me to tell the deceased they were unhappy with their decisions. The deceased's ex-husband demanded that I tell the deceased she was a goddamn working girl. And the remaining son thanked me personally for gifting them the house. This large French farmer's family had been fighting each other for 15 years over their parents' estate. Everything and anything had been a weapon in this all-out war. Debts, spoils, barns, plots, cows, wills, whatever. Defeats followed victories, failures followed compromises, but progress was being made, and at some point the killing zone turned to a standstill. Everything was agreed as long as nobody talked antics, jewelry, furniture, kitchenware, photographs, laundry, or tools. A long, protracted peace ensued, any goodwill tentative harshly discouraged before even being aired. Time went on with no issue in sight. Then someone suggested they just drag all the stuff into the farm's courtyard, pour petrol on it, and set it all afire. Everyone agreed. Not so much the original will itself, but the aftermath and greed of the siblings. Almost none of them talk anymore. There are 10 of them total. They were fighting over a couple of 100 acres, most of which is swamp. The greed part is they wanted to have the original will amended. Every grandkid was supposed to get a portion in the original will, along with the siblings. However, the siblings nixed that via the courts. They were going to then split the property amongst themselves, but the executor just didn't give an F and let it sit for 30 years without doing anything. The rest wanted it done, so court cases, massive debt, finally the executor having control seized from them. Thanks to the court cases, though, the property was in massive debt, being held as collateral, and now they're all too old or dead to do anything about it. If the will had gone through as originally intended, the family, which consists of about 35 grandchildren, would have all been happy. Or at least had money for selling the property, which was probably worth about 35 grand per section. Now it's probably just going to go under eventually for non-payment. Even if I could buy some of it for cheap, I'm not touching it with a 100-mile pole. My school lucked into its art museum because of William Ackland's crazy will. He donated a ton of money to Duke for an art museum on the condition that he be buried in said museum. Duke noped out of that little clause and the money, so UNC happily accepted the gift, built the Ackland Art Center, and you can go see his tomb right there in it. I enjoy sharing this fun little trivia piece when I give tours. I read a will that was pretty normal up until the decedent asked that his cremated ashes be sprinkled on the crotches of well-endowed handsome boys. Maybe he was trying to be funny. Steady Ed Hedrick, the inventor of the Frisbee, had his ashes melted into some Frisbees. Oh, I have a crazy story. My grandma's sister was a narcissist and extremely vindictive. She and her husband gained a significant number of assets over the years, including a somewhat profitable farm with over 100 acres of fields. They had a few children, all boys, and they all had wives and children of their own. Her husband died about 6 years before she did. Somehow, in their 50 years of marriage and living on said farm, they'd never bothered to go to a lawyer and write a will. Instead, she wrote a note and left it in their safe of legal documents, saying that nothing was to go to the wife of one of her sons, who incidentally had died almost 20 years ago, or to her children. This because the son's wife was apparently more outspoken and wouldn't be controlled by the old bag. So she made it clear in her will that she absolutely despised her, and my entire family too. So everything went into probate, and the kids are still trying to get everything squared away a year later. But the people she wanted excluded might be getting some of it too. The Hughette Clark story is utterly fascinating to me. She died in 2011 at age 104. She was a wealthy recluse, a daughter of a copper baron, who hadn't seen any family since her mother had passed away. In 1963, she lived the last 20 years of her life in a hospital in Manhattan, having contact with only a handful of people, and she rarely had face-to-face interactions. Of her $300 million fortune, she gave most to charity, including her palatial estates, $30 million to her longtime nurse, $1 million to the hospital, money to the caretakers of said palatial estates, her accountant and lawyer, and nothing to her relatives. Except all of that was written in her second will, which was written 6 weeks after the first. 2 years of litigation from relatives who'd never met her later, and many of her charitable donations and bequeathments to those close to her were removed or greatly reduced. Of course, the lawyers of the relatives ensured that a large part of the settlement money went to themselves. My grandpa gave all of his belongings to my father, who was the youngest of 4 brothers and 3 sisters, while my grandma was still alive. Grandpa told Dad that he gave him everything rightfully because he believed my dad will split everything equally. Grandma wanted her property back. Dad at the time, only 20, obeyed his mum. Big frickin' court case several years later between all the brothers because it was indeed not evenly split. Still going strong to this day with no grandma around anymore. Grandpa was a wise man, he just miscalculated. I'm not a lawyer, but I have a sad story that fits here. My great-grandmother and grandfather had a will that would give their 6 kids a fair share when they both were dead. But my grandfather passed, and the oldest of the kids, the jerk, took it to court to get his part even if the will said that they'd get their share when both were dead. This made my great-grandmother lose everything. She didn't get to handle the sorrow of losing her husband, whom she'd been married to for 68 years. Instead, she had to go to court many times, and then she lost the house they'd built and almost everything she owned. We helped her get an apartment and tried to keep her happy. She deteriorated quickly after those months. I hate how someone can let greed come between families. I've never even met the jerk. When I was in law school, I heard about a case involving a generational trust. It says, "All my grandchildren get the money when the youngest reaches the age of 25. The youngest grandchild was 24, and they were all making plans for their inheritance. But, plot twist, one of the sons remarried and had a baby, a new heir, when the other grandchildren were 24. So, the rest of them had to wait until they were more than 50 to inherit. I asked if the baby had a bodyguard, and my friend didn't know." When did you accidentally come across as a complete badass? At work, there was this big burly former Marine/mercenary from Iraq who was back stateside, a massive mountain of a man. We came to face each other in one of the narrow corridors of the office where one of us was going to have to turn sideways. Neither of us turned, but we stopped. Now, I'm 6'1", 260 pounds, and he still towered over me. He was a nice guy, but still a little conditioned, I guess you could say, or mentally unhinged. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You feeling froggy?" It was truly like something out of a movie. Without blinking, I replied, "You'd better jump." We both then cracked up and turned sideways, while the office breathed a collective sigh of relief. At work, project management undercut and mismanaged a project so badly. They pushed getting minimum viable product out with the goal to roll out improvements later, also known as the Bethesda approach. Product released, they all patted themselves on the back and moved on. Then that minimum viable product broke. In a meeting we had with our directors about how it's so broken and the cost to fix it, where we were told that there was no cost too big and unlimited manpower, among other things, I decided to ask, "So how come we couldn't afford to do it right, but we can afford to do it twice?" I'll never forget the moment a family walked into the local pub I was working at while I was there. This big, king-of-the-grill, bald alpha patriarch dad type and his wife and kids came through, and I said, "Welcome, where would you like to sit?" And he snapped back, "Well, a table would be nice." And without missing a beat at all, I replied, "Actually, we usually sit on the chairs here." I'll never forget the satisfaction of that moment or the look on his face. My uncles were talking crap about my dad, so I walked into the conversation and told them it wasn't polite to talk about people behind their backs. One of them turned to me and said I shouldn't interrupt when the men are speaking, and completely out of character, I replied, "I don't see any men in here." Boy, did I get some crap that day, but that's how I knew I won that exchange. I'm a 4th grade teacher, and one day I was up at the board and struggling to remember how to spell a particular word. I was trying to make light of it, telling the kids that sometimes adults need help with spelling too. One student replied, "It's because you were poorly educated, but don't worry, we're poorly educated too." Oof, double whammy. I genuinely can't tell if that kid is actually trying to own you or is a sweet but misguided soul. In any case, that's an absolute ego hammering you took that day. Rest in peace, you. I worked in cell phone sales for a few years, and a woman came in with a fairly new flip phone. This was 2018, so we barely still sold them. She was complaining because one of the sides of the screen was dangling off, and she said she didn't do anything, it just snapped, and demanded a new phone. I told her, "That looks like physical damage, and we don't have any coverage for that since you didn't buy a phone protection warranty." She insisted it wasn't physical damage and the phone just sucks and broke itself. She started freaking out and calling me all kinds of names and swinging her phone in my face, and then the top half of the phone literally snapped off and landed on the counter in front of me. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "Well, that was definitely physical damage." She lost her mind at my comment, and it was weirdly satisfying. Working retail, a Karen once told me she had hoped I'd die. I was so into work mode that I blankly responded, "I mean, we all die, that's not much of a threat." Maybe it was my lack of intimidation or my blank stare, but that really shut her up. I didn't realize the nature of my comment when I wrote it, but in high school, one of my teachers did end-of-the-year anonymous evaluations. Everyone hated him, and I understood why, but I still did well in his class. I wrote, "I don't have any critiques about your teaching, but I think you should work on being a better person." Forensic biology professor brought out a fresh human brain as a surprise to a stunned class. He said, "You had no idea what I had to go through to get this." Someone asked, "Well, the skull, right?" When I was 12, my older sister had a boy over for Thanksgiving dinner. She dated a lot of D-bags, but this guy took the cake. Big, brash, annoying jerkhead who was rude to her and basically everyone. As we sat down for dinner, before we were about to say what we were thankful for, he says, "Looks like I'm seated at the head of the table. I must be important," with a huge crap-eating grin. Without pausing, I gestured to my dad, seated opposite him, and said, "Actually, my dad is at the head of the table. You're the butthole." My mum scolded me for swearing at the table, but years later told me her and my dad thought it was hilarious. After 4 years in a horrible toxic relationship, which turned into a 1-year horrible toxic marriage, I told my ex that I wanted a divorce. He told me that I couldn't divorce him or I'd go to hell. My response was, "Well, then I guess I'll see you there." I then kicked him out of my house, for which he'd never paid a dime in bills, and told him to call his mum for a plane ticket. Not the most badass story here, but it did feel good. I was around 17 or 18 and getting my first filling at the dentist. They pumped me full of nitrous oxide for pain and to help me relax during the procedure. The dentist came back and asked me, "How are you feeling?" All I said was, "I don't." And he lost his crap and cracked up for what seemed like 20 minutes before he could pull himself together. I also started laughing because of the laughing gas, and his laugh was infectious. So we were both just sitting in the room laughing, and all of his assistants came by and were very confused. Not me, but my daughter. This boy at school called her retarded, and her response? "No, I'm autistic. I don't know what your fricking excuse is." She was in 6th grade. I was pretty shocked when I got that phone call. She doesn't usually say things like that to people. I got real drunk when I was probably about 25, got in a bar fight, as was my habit, and got knocked out cold, which was also a bad habit I had back in those days. I woke up in an emergency room to a cop who said, "It's 4:30 a.m., you're in so-and-so emergency room, you just blew a .29 BAC, so I have to take you to the detox center now." I stood up from the chair that they had me in, and the cop goes, "Hey wait, are you okay to walk?" And I threw my arm around his shoulder and bellowed out, "Walk? Hell, I'm driving, let's go." He was not amused, and he got a little rough with me, but about half the emergency room staff completely lost it. I eventually quit drinking and fighting, though it took me about 10 more years of failure before I hit that point. I worked at Target back in college in a stocking job where we had to be there at like 4 or 5 a.m. to unload trucks. One morning I overslept a bit and walked to the unpacking line about 10 minutes late eating a breakfast bar. The boss stormed over and started loudly berating me in front of everyone for being late. As he was going on, I was listening and taking bites of the bar without much expression, mainly because I was so damn tired. It finally bothered him that I was disrespectfully chewing during the yelling, and he stopped mid-sentence. He held out his hand and said, "Give me that damn thing." It just so happened that I only had 1 bite left, so I took it, handed him the wrapper, and said, "Thanks," with a mouthful of food. He paused and then started laughing at the ridiculous response to his ranting. Young male traveling with a bunch of other males, Border Patrol, we were being searched for substance smuggling. The Border Patrol agent says, "You know I have the authority to cavity search you." And I say, somehow, without skipping a beat, "I mean, sure, you might, but neither of us would enjoy it and you wouldn't find anything. Off the hook. No fingers in this butt." A couple of months ago, my now ex-friend was telling me all the things that were wrong with me, and she finished it with, "And at least I don't have to wear makeup to look pretty." I was so fed up with her crap, so I responded, "Well, at least I'm capable of looking pretty." She was speechless, and I felt like such a badass because this was the first time I ever stood up to her. Back in high school, I was a slow, fat kid. For PE, we'd jog about 1 kilometer to the beach, have a swimming lesson, then jog back. I was the last one back to the school grounds, and the teacher was standing at the gate. He told me that because I was too slow, he was going to lock the gate, and I'd have to jog to the next one 200 meters away. I said that I'd consider him locking me out of the school grounds to be a suspension and to just go home. He let me in straight away. Kinda wished he'd tried calling my bluff so I could have followed through and just gone home. I was accused of being passive-aggressive. I replied, "Which part sounded passive? I don't ever want to come across as passive." I think a lot of people incorrectly label active aggression with passive aggression, and while I don't think either of those are usually warranted or appropriate, I do appreciate calling out the distinction. Although it does have to be said that your way of doing it does ironically come across as passive aggression, and now I have a headache. I'm a writer and I do a bit of stand-up comedy as well. As such, people tend to introduce me to new people as a comedian and writer, stuff like that. So I was outside a bar smoking with a friend of a friend. He then introduced me to one of his friends. His friend was dressed like Liam Gallagher from Oasis and seemed to exude a bit of a cocky, sneery manner. The introduction went thusly. My friend said, "Mr. Gallagher, this is John. He's a comedian." Mr. Gallagher looked me up and down. "Comedian, huh? Does that mean you think you're funny?" I answered, "No, it means everyone else does." I literally don't know where it came from. I didn't even think about that response, it just came out. And it's hands down the greatest thing I've ever said. At work at a company meeting, someone was presenting something cool that they volunteered to work on and finished. They then explained things they thought they could do better in a self-depreciating way, and a bunch of other people started railing into his work with petty criticism. It was definitely good work though, and a thought just hit me, so I blurted out, "Sometimes done is the best feature." A bunch of people laughed and then the criticism stopped. People gave him kudos and we moved on. Not really badass, I guess, but I was surprised this thought somehow came out fully formed, like it was some phrase I've been saying for decades. I guess I was just realizing how many people don't finish anything they start, so done suddenly seemed like a pretty damn good feature. Give the man some credit for finishing the damn thing. I was in an acting class in college and we were doing a scene where a couple was having a big drawn-out fight. Multiple pairs went through the scene and I'd studied it pretty hard so I knew all the lines. We're about halfway through our performance when my partner clearly forgets what her line is. And because everyone's doing that scene, they could tell she had forgotten as well. Her next line was, "Well, I'm sorry I asked." I'm not usually a quick thinker on my feet, but I just filled the second or two of awkward silence with, "I bet you're sorry you asked, huh?" and continued on with my lines. Not overly badass per se, but the class and professor loved it and they all laughed. Probably the only quick-witted thing I've ever done in my life. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There was this one extremely attractive girl in my Comms 101 class in college. One day for a project where we interviewed other students, I was partnered with her. We ended up not finishing our questions in class, so I asked her if I could meet her somewhere to finish interviewing her. She said yes. Fast forward to the next day, I meet her after her dance group finishes rehearsal. I knock through the last few questions, and the final one, which I ask is, "What do you perceive the future to hold?" And she replies, "I don't even know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I have no idea what the future holds." So I say, "Well, if you don't know what you're having for dinner, do you want to have dinner with me?" She laughed, said yes, and though we only hooked up that night, I still look back on that day as one of the best dating stories I've had yet. I work at a bookstore and a customer asked me, "How often do the periodicals come out?" I deadpanned, "Periodically," and he asked to speak to my manager. Worth it. I used to work in a bookstore. Sarcastic answers to dumb questions were the best. The worst was a customer who asked, "Where is your non-fiction section?" "Oh, what topic are you looking for? We have lots of non-fiction." "Just your regular non-fiction. Biographies, history, computers, gardening? Just regular non-fiction." "Okay. You see that sign over there that says fiction? The entire rest of the store." Yes, I had amazing job security to pull that one. Kind of a proud moment for me. I was always really shy in school, had very few friends, was bullied a lot. My mum passed away when I was 14 and I kept it to myself, not wanting sympathy or more bullying for it. Someone found out, I'm not sure how. They then said in one of our mutual classes that I should just die like my stupid mum did. The whole class was shocked. Even the teacher was like a deer in the headlights. I immediately got up to leave, but before I left I turned to her, got up close and said, "I've seen what cancer does to people. It hurts, and I would never wish that on anyone, not even you." And I turned and walked out. A lot of people gave me some respect for the fact that I stood up for myself, although people then knew my mum had died, which wasn't great. I ended up leaving school a few months later anyways, but I was glad that I stood up for myself. Me and my girlfriend at the time were having a discussion about her going back to school. She kept putting it off every semester, and one day she got angry at me trying to tell her to actually go back, not just talk about it. And she yelled, "Rome wasn't built in a day," and I responded, "Yeah, but it was built." And a decade later, I still think of that. She did end up going back to school, got her master's even. She's married now, with twins. Just a real butthole. We had an overly dramatic neighbor who always claimed she was sick and dying. My mum came to see my kids in the middle of battling stage 4 lung cancer. The neighbor pulled her over. "Hi Rita, so glad to see you. Did Jason tell you that I'm dying?" My mum looked right at her, smiled and said, "Me too, dear, but not today." Never more proud of her. At a party a few years back, someone stole my friend's purse. Her boyfriend found the guys who took it and got it back for her. But he was still in an angry, drunken rage and was continuing to escalate the situation when he was well outnumbered. My friend finds me and says, "Look, I'm afraid he's about to get into a fight. I need your help. Please stop him." I stood up and told her, "I can't promise you I can stop him from fighting, but I can promise you I won't let him lose," before walking off to find him. Ultimately, no fight actually broke out, and I didn't realize that I'd basically said a cheesy one-liner until well after the fact when my friend told me how intense that line was. I didn't mean for it to sound so dramatic, I just wanted to let her know that I wouldn't let him get his butt kicked. I didn't mean to make it sound like I was about to demolish 3 guys by myself like I'm some sort of action hero. I think this would have been even funnier if you'd gone and got destroyed by the 3 guys. From your friends' perspectives, all of this confident bravado, a completely badass line followed by the beatdown of a century complete with crying and pant-wetting. Classic comedy. Glad it didn't come to that, though. Well, I don't know about badass, but years ago I worked at Hard Rock Cafe, and we often had pre-shift server meetings outdoors on a patio. And while my boss was droning on about us selling more overpriced plastic cups, I was staring off at the spinning globe on top of the building that said, "Save the planet" on it. I interrupted my boss by blurting out, "If Hard Rock is trying to save the planet, why do we waste so much on paper?" Which was really directed at my managers, who had a hard-on for printing out stupid memos. They somehow didn't realize it was about them specifically and passed the comment up the food chain, which ended up resulting in the entire company changing the payroll system to paperless globally. As a reward, I was given a pin shaped like a light bulb that said "Bright Idea" on it. Thanks, I guess. A guy pushed my 5-year-old daughter at the fish store and she started crying. I said, "Go wait with mummy, daddy might be going to jail again." When he heard me say that, he ran out of the store. I've never been to jail before. This one had a little setup, but I think it's funny enough to share. At a family vacation, my grandmother was giving me grief for not remembering her birthday. I've never been good with birthdays. After telling me it was the password to her iPhone, she'd wanted me to take a picture with it, which is why I needed the password. While she was distracted, I opened up the settings, changed her password to my birthday, and then set her phone down. Cue 15 minutes later, she's trying to get into her phone and it's not working. Suspecting mischief, she grumpily asks me if I've changed the password to her phone in front of our entire family. I admit that I did. "Well, what is it?" she asked impatiently. "It's my birth date." She sat there in stunned silence for 15 minutes, not being able to remember my birthday, before our family exploded laughing. It was a good time. A friend of mine was giving me crap while we were all bowling. Off the cuff, I yelled at him, "You're adopted. Your parents don't even like you." He laughed because, friends. Like 3 hours later, it hit me and I turned around and said, "Holy crap, dude, you are adopted." I'd completely forgot. "I'm so sorry, dude," which he thought made the whole situation even funnier. I actually said nothing. I was on my motorcycle in traffic on a wet overpass with short jersey walls. Guy behind me was driving a bit too fast and slammed on his brakes, sliding into me, but no damage, as he was going slow enough to touch and push me about 5 feet before finally coming to a stop. The angle had me going straight forward so I didn't fall. Had it been much faster, I would have been thrown over the edge to my death. So obviously I was, well, not happy. I turned off the engine, got off the bike, slowly walked over to the driver that hit me. It was only a few feet, and when he saw me coming to him, he furiously started raising his manual window, so I could just see him struggling to pump the winder. When I got there, I just knocked on his window, pointed at him, turned around, and walked away. He looked terrified. I didn't think about it until later. A guy you just hit in a car wearing a black helmet, with shaded visor, black heavy thick jacket, black heavy riding pants, road-crafted jacket and pants, black thick and metal-studded gloves, and black leather boots knocks on your window and points at you for being a supreme idiot. I had no idea. Wanted to give him a bit of mouth, but then to tell him I was okay and take a second to verify my bike was as well. I was eating McDonald's with a few friends and I started choking. The only thing I managed to say in the whole ordeal was, "I'm McChoking." A long time ago, I was walking down a side street in a medium-sized town with my girlfriend. A car was parked ahead, with the front of the car facing us as we approached. I could see 2 kids, maybe in their late teens, and I could instantly tell they were likely going to say something as my girlfriend was rather attractive. As soon as we came up next to them, I heard, "Hey baby, ditch the zero and come hang with the hero." I could feel my blood boil, but I kept my cool and calmly said, "Sorry buddy, I'm not gay, and don't call my girlfriend a zero." The guy's friends started laughing at him, and my girlfriend made a sarcastic crying face, then we both started to laugh. When I was 7, some girls were bullying me at school. I'd just learned the word mutual. One of the bullies said, "We don't like you," and I said, "The feeling's mutual," and walked off. I'm 37 now and I still remember that. I was doing a university project, had to do a large presentation in front of a group of maybe 50 or 60 other students about a possible business of manufacturing an education toy for kids. It was a bit of a train wreck as no one else in the group had rehearsed or even read the script. As with all presentations, they asked for questions at the end and I stepped up to answer questions. There was one guy at the back that always asked awkward things like, "What if someone were to injure themselves and sue you?" or "Have you factored in matching employees' pensions?" It was meant to be a fun project for first-year students. They weren't expecting tons of detail. When it came to asking questions, I volunteered to answer them. The guy opened right away, asking awkward questions, but he had misjudged just how much work I'd done on the details. I asked the lecturer hosting the session if I could load up my spreadsheet, and he allowed it. That's when the guy realized he'd just asked the wrong guy. I'd made an automatic spreadsheet that could work out how many people were needed, how many machines, what hours people could work, rolling production over 24 hours, and overlapping shifts to ensure it all worked at maximum efficiency. Add to that, it worked out costs, complying to the law exactly, including pension contributions, tax amounts, holidays, time off work due to illness, insurance, rent, and more. When it came to asking his group questions, I asked him every single thing he'd overlooked legally, like time off for work, pay increases, stuff like that. On the way out, the other groups gave me a smile as it had shut him right up. About 25 years ago, I was in grade 9 and my parents bought me a pair of Air Max. I'm a female, but I'd picked a pair of Air Max that were supposed to be for males because I preferred the color of the shoes. I was super pumped to get those shoes. We didn't have lots of money and it was a pretty extravagant purchase. Anyway, I was at our local shopping center and I ran into a group of guys I went to high school with. They were a real bunch of buttholes that thrived on dumping on other people. One of the guys had on the same pair of shoes as me and said to me, "Do you know you're wearing men's shoes?" To which I quickly replied, "Then why the frick are you wearing them?" The other guys peed themselves laughing and it still stands out in my mind after all these years. What jobs exist because the human race is completely stupid? Traffic police in Baltimore. I was there this summer and the gridlock was atrocious. People push their way into the intersection, the light turns red, and they're stuck there until the light is about to turn red in the opposite direction, at which point those people push their way into the intersection and the cycle perpetuates. During rush hour, they have police standing in the intersections, not to direct traffic though, simply to hold their hands up when the light turns red so people don't push their way into the intersection. Basically, a human has to stand in traffic for hours just to tell the drivers what the lights mean. It was unbelievable. Oh god, this reminds me of Atlanta. They have highway signs that tell you how many people have died so far that year in traffic accidents, and it is obscene. It was something like just under 1,000 people so far this year in August. And yet, everyone still drives like they're the only person on the road, so screw it. Why not watch YouTube on my phone, swerve between lanes with no advance warning, and tailgate like I'm trying to drive through the other car? It's freaking terrifying, and I was only there for 3 days, and now I never want to go back. Ever. Just knowing that there are people who treat 5 lanes of traffic like it's a gosh darn go-kart track makes me want to hurl. My job, financial advisor. My advice to you? First, save money for retirement. At least 10% of what you earn gross in an IRA or employer-sponsored plan. Put it in growth mutual funds or ETFs and don't touch it until you're satisfied you have enough there to live on no more than 4 to 5% of the balance per year for the rest of your life. Don't consider individual stocks with this money. Second, establish a basic budget based on your post-retirement savings income and current expenses. Do not spend more than you bring in on a regular basis. 3. Save a little after-tax money from every paycheck in an FDIC-insured savings account. This is your emergency fund. Don't touch it if you're not in financial dire straits. 4. Once you have at least 3 months of expenses covered by that emergency account, keep saving the money but flow it into another investment vehicle, such as stocks, bonds, CDs, treasuries, real estate, precious metals, whatever you're comfortable with depending on your goals and risk tolerance that can at least hold value, if not grow it. This is your savings for home, car, vacation, and other major purchases. With the possible exceptions of purchasing a home or borrowing for an education that will actually pay for itself, don't take on debt. Pay off your credit cards monthly. Pay your bills on time. If you can't follow all of the above steps, take a hard look at your lifestyle. Either find a way to earn more money, spend less money, or both. Second jobs are sometimes necessary. Many people just need to eat out less, go to bars less, drive a cheaper car, or downgrade their living situation. Don't give in to trying to impress others or looking good on social media. Just do you. Hopefully, the microphone didn't pick up the narrator rapidly scribbling and taking down notes on this commenter's points. Thanks for writing in. I really don't think about any of these things enough, and I really should. The guys who install rubber padding around telephone and light poles so when we walk and text, we don't break our noses walking straight into them. I work in an aquarium, and we have what I can best describe as floor guides, which are just staff that interact with people and share interesting info about the exhibits. Realistically, while that is part of the job, the main reason for these people being out there is to tell people to keep their hands out of the stingray and turtle tanks, because for some reason beyond my comprehension, people just don't naturally get this concept. At least once per day I hear, "Well, why can't I touch the stingrays?" And so far, my all-time favorite outcome of that question was a kid who said, "They have the word sting in their name." I've wanted to say that so many times, but I'm unable. And yes, I know that stingrays are relatively harmless and won't sting unless they're in fear of their lives and have no escape. They want to run away before all else and are actually quite friendly. That being said, it isn't that we don't trust the rays, we just don't trust the people. Also, we do have a touch tank with rays in it, but it's curated and the barbs on those rays are trimmed regularly as a further precaution. At my university, we have a person whose job is to stand by the garbage area and make sure people dispose of their trash appropriately. My school had a massive issue with recycling getting contaminated. It got so bad at one point that the company refused to take their recycling for a few months. They decided to redesign all of the bins to make it super clear what you can and can't recycle, and the recycling bins are always next to a trash can, so it's never more work to recycle. People still throw food and trash in the recycling bins and vice versa. On crowded nights, Disney Springs has employees working at crosswalks at the intersections from the overflow parking lots to tell people when they can cross. They're normal intersections that have lights telling you when you can cross. People just don't acknowledge them and will try to run across incoming traffic. Let's make a new ride. We'll call it Disney Springs Natural Selection Night. I met this one guy once. His job was putting dirt on potatoes. Somebody along the supply chain washed them pretty well by the time they got to the grocery store. People didn't trust the clean potatoes, so this guy had to put dirt back on them to make them more authentic. Somewhat related, continuously variable transmissions, or CVTs, are becoming more and more common in modern cars. CVTs have a virtually infinite number of gear ratios compared to the normal 5 to 7 speed automatics. In a normal automatic, you can feel the gear shift, but with a CVT, there are no shifts to feel as it smoothly moves between ratios. People complain that they think something's wrong when they notice there are no gear shifts. Because of this, engineers program the CVT to only use several specific ratios to recreate the feeling of the shift, defeating the purpose of the CVT. I'm a self-serve gas station attendant. Honestly, the only reason I'm here is to slap the emergency stop button if or when someone starts pumping gas outside their car or gas can. Oh, and to shut off the pumps when I leave. Did you ever have to tell a motorcycle gang member, it was a pagan in my case, legendary for their violence, that he couldn't smoke while pumping gas? I did. I thought long and hard about the wisdom of that and came to the conclusion that next time I was going to grab a bag of popcorn and watch the show from my booth in complete safety. The companies that get you out of timeshares. The worst part is that most of those are absolute scams as well. Broad answer to questions and comments I'm getting about this, though. Timeshares aren't scams for the most part. It's just a very different way of travel and doesn't work for everyone. Not all resales are bad. It just happens to be another industry that has more than its fair share of scammers. Be extremely cautious with resale and do your homework. My source? I worked in operations management for timeshare companies for about a decade. My husband is a labor and employment attorney for a massive company and gives monthly seminars to everyone there not to send pics of their naughty bits or make repeated unwanted advances on one another. And like clockwork, someone in that room does it within a couple of weeks. Tier 1 IT support. Did you try turning it off and on again? Sure you did. Could you blow into the cable to make sure there's no dust in the connect? Oh, the cable was loose? How surprising. Have a nice day. My mother gets hacked every day through her dial-up. She refuses to upgrade because the constant connection means the hackers can't hack her more, apparently. They make her Facebook run slow. Dial-up. And why does she think she's being hacked? Because things run slowly a lot. One look at her desktop tells me everything I need to know. Everything she interacts with ends up there. She constantly complains about slow startup. If it's not on the desktop, she can't find it. But my favorite part? She always tells people she's a programmer because she used to use DOS. Also, apparently she's a computer expert because she took one class 20 years ago. She is the embodiment of her generation's relationship to computers. I have a side gig doing data entry. I earn $25 an hour copying and pasting stuff from a web page into an Excel spreadsheet while doing some light formatting. To answer a few repeat questions, I know the employer personally, which led to me picking up this work. It's not a lot of hours per week, but the extra money is definitely useful. It's difficult finding this kind of work. You won't find it looking for job ads. You need to approach companies that you feel would have a need for this kind of service. And yes, you could potentially get Excel to do it automatically, but this is how you code yourself out of a job. You could learn to do it to make your job easier, but just be careful to never let anyone know, and if they get suspicious, lie your gosh damn butt off. Or take the opposite route, publicize your creation, put it on your resume, and use it to take the job of the dumb motherfricker before you who never thought to do it. IT Service Help Desk. My job exists because of stupid, and let me give you a pro tip about computers. Computers don't break because they don't do what you tell them to. Computers break because they do exactly what you tell them to. Although the narrator is generally on the side of the IT workers in this great debate, I will note that there are very occasional cases of just straight-up hardware failure or decline. But yes, generally people input commands and then get angry when the commands are followed to the letter with robotic precision. Psychic detectives, because why trust a professional detective to be intuitive? I had a temp job in a posh department store a few years ago. The escalator going down from floor 2 to floor 1 had to be taken out to be replaced, which took a month. Despite the many notices and signs directing people to the lifts and stairs, a member of staff had to stand at the top of the closed escalator just to direct the public to the lifts and stairs. It broke people's brains, and it was worrying to see how many people tried to get past the barriers or get angry and shouty because there was no escalator. Like, holy crap, how did people cope before moving stairs were invented? I read the title as, "Do Jobs Exist Because the Human Race is Completely Stupid?" and I had a deeply existential moment where I considered becoming a hermit. All of the, quote, jobs at multi-level marketing companies. Hey hun, look, I know we haven't talked since kindergarten, but I'm sorry you're duped into thinking that 9 to 5 grind for someone else is where it's at. But I'm my own boss. I set my own hours and I get paid every 10 seconds. Can you say that? Ka-ching! Why wait 2 weeks for a livable paycheck? You can join my team of #bossbabes, but I only have 2 spots open, so take this #opportunity while you can. Yeah, it's a lot of upfront cost, but invest in yourself. Because you're worth it. I support my family by selling all-natural, crystal-based, arsenic-infused face scream, and even if you don't want to rock that mompreneur lifestyle, you should defs think about checking out our line of products. I've seen your pics. You could definitely use them, and definitely buy them from me. My garage is super full of scientifically unproven garbage, and my family and friends won't talk to me anymore. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Gossip column journalists and paparazzi. The specialist cleaners that they hire specifically to clean up places that have been used as crystal manufacturing labs. It's pretty sad to see how much of this industry is growing in Australia. Bouncers at bars and clubs. Drunk people can be the biggest idiots, and you need someone there that can handle them so they don't ruin other people's good times. I watched a drunk couple thrown out of a concert earlier this week for general obnoxiousness. I don't think enough people appreciate how much these kinds of jobs improve our experiences. I was a bouncer at a nightclub. Don't have to deal with that many aggressive people, just drunk slobs usually. Had a girl once come to me sobbing because she couldn't find the exit that was 2 meters to my right, with a huge green exit sign just above it. Ticket companies that sell you tickets from ticket companies that sell you tickets. Fortnite coaches. Oh, they have coaches for League of Legends too. Oh, there were coaches for Halo 2 back in the day, and Halo 3. I remember seeing people ask for Microsoft points for an hour or 2 of coaching in Halo 3. Ugh, homeopaths. They're everywhere here in Germany, and insurance even pays for their treatments. It's ridiculous. Rag pickers and road garbage cleaners. My first job out of college was to stand outside of Aldi's and help people figure out how to put the quarter in the slot to release the shopping cart, and then later, how to put the chain back in to get their quarter back. I said, screw that. I stood there all day, baked out of my gourd. Gas pump attendant. Technical help desks. For me specifically, level 1 help desk. When I first started out in IT, so many of the issues users had were essentially 10 seconds of Google foo on our end to fix. Now, when you get to level 2 and above is where the paid pros really come in, even if it's still a whole lot of Googling to find the answer. And I know it's a joke, but the whole did you turn it off and back on thing really does fix the issues in a lot of cases. A professor told me that in his experience, just doing that fixed probably between 50 to 60% of issues. Surely the correct answer is those poor people who have to write the warnings and disclaimers. I've got to say a lot of these other people are commenting and seem to be largely confusing jerks with stupid. There are a lot of jobs that deal with people being jerks. That doesn't make them stupid, just jerks. I mean, kinda true, but a lot of the time the reason they are buttheads is because they're too stupid, oblivious, or ignorant of the effect their selfish actions can have on others. Televangelists. I hope I live to see the day people stop giving money to con men who buy McMansions and private jets and claim they deserve it because God loves them. It's easier for a camel to fit through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go into heaven in the Bible, so they should be one of the few groups disliked by Christians and atheists alike. Safety officer. Common sense is not common. I work in an office alongside the health and safety team. I mostly answer phones and put track sheets into systems. We deal with utility work, and I genuinely once had a phone call complaining that the workers were rude to someone. When I asked what they did, they told him off for moving the safety barriers out of his way. The safety barriers that were around the hole they'd just dug, and instead of crossing the road or walking around, this grown adult decided to move the barriers out of the way and walk through the site. I had to explain to him for the second time why it was dangerous to do so. Yep, people really will get angry that someone told them not to do something that could potentially cause them serious harm. And the narrator is willing to bet that this same person came away from the phone call angry that they hadn't gotten an apology rather than having learned anything. In Great America, there was and is a whole campaign where designers, marketers, PR staff, mascots, and whatnot were organized to create a bear with a hat to teach people not to set fire to forests. Well, it wasn't about not setting forest fires in the way you're making it sound. It was to make people more aware if they dropped lit cigarette butts or lit fireworks in grassy areas and made sure campfires and grills were out when leaving the area. Classroom support. I'm specifically thinking about my current engineering classes, where an electrical engineering professor preaches problem-solving skills above all until he's confounded by a projector. I'm an attorney. 90% of our work is spent on 10% of our clients. Then they blame us for getting in trouble after doing what we told them not to do. Basically, stupid people keep us employed. Stop breaking the law, idiots. Those parking guides at the Disney World parking lot. It takes a team of 10 people just to make sure we all park correctly, an activity we all do multiple times a day. I did this job for a year at Disney. I mean, it's definitely a needed service. People really lose their minds when they get to Disney. So many cars left running with doors open, which people had abandoned to get to the gate quicker. Man, I loved those. There's no guesswork and I didn't have to choose the perfect spot. They made me park next to a truck I wouldn't have considered before. While we can do it all ourselves, you end up with a lot less parking lot efficiency cruising up and down, blocking traffic while you do it, trying to find that one empty spot. I felt like a princess when they just gave me a spot and waved me in there. The only thing that could have made me feel more VIP is if they brought me in on a palanquin. Slaughterhouse workers. Are you kidding? Meat is necessary in our diet. I'm just kidding, it's absolutely not. Go plant-based today. Computer repair for the most part. Probably half of all the things I had to repair were extremely silly mistakes that could have been avoided by simply reading. Whenever people get an error message, they panic and click it away. Most don't even read it, when reading it could already help you fix it. I remember one guy who said he didn't want to pay us to put a SIM card in his phone, and I completely understood this because it's overpriced as heck. But we still told him to make sure to take the nano SIM out of the holder it came in order for it to fit in his phone. 10 minutes later, he came back because he'd ruined his phone trying to forcefully push the SIM card and the holder into the socket of his phone. If you really think about it, probably like 50% of the workforce. I'm an engineer and most of my day is spent fixing mistakes, designing things so they work even if the operator is a monkey, and doing things for other people because they can't figure out how. I used to be an emergency dispatcher. 90% of the calls were because people were stupid. Environmental lobbyists. We're going to go extinct because there are rich and powerful people who think they can save themselves from this cataclysm they've been cooking. Managers. I ran a department of 35 developers for many years, and I was keenly aware that all I basically did was ferry information from one person to another. Priorities from execs to developers, risks from developers to execs, dates, schedules, stuff like that. I was an information processing system. I remember thinking, and if Bob would just remember to tell Alice what she needs to know, I wouldn't be needed. But they can't, so that's why I get paid this insane salary. Mechanic checking in. 80% of the crap that rolls or gets flatbedded to the shop is because people who own cars are stupid. 20% because the engineers who design the crap the way they do are stupid as well. Televangelists. Just send us your money. We need that new jet. As a doctor in the US, I'd say at least half of the diseases I see on a daily basis are due to stupid decision-making. In fact, probably 75% of the cardiac and 90% of the pulmonary flaws would probably be empty if people didn't smoke. And these days, it's becoming very common to see obesity hypoventilation syndrome, i.e. too fat to breathe. People that were paid to write horoscopes. Okay, I have an answer that's legitimately related to us stupidly losing a valuable form of communication. I work in a music school as a piano accompanist. I play for a lot of kids' voice lessons who are training for a professional music career. But solidly half of them don't know how to read sheet music. So the other portion of my job involves making recordings of their sheet music for them so they have some kind of clue what the frick is going on. We rely on recordings for everything, so reading sheet music is a fast dying skill. This leaves those poor kids completely unprepared for the real world, where they'll not always have a pianist who can read their music for them. Many of them come back to visit us and say, "Wow, having pianists in undergrad to help us was really helpful." And I feel terrible that I'm basically a crutch to help them get through school. Slot machine attendant. If people could do math, nobody would play slots. Well, I don't know. I think most people have heard of the astronomically low odds of ever winning one of those things, but for some, it's because it's fun and just due to an addictive personality and the way those things wow us. And now I'm remembering at least one other video I've done on casinos where people legitimately won at the machines and just didn't care. They just wanted the chemical sensation after they put in that coin and the bright lights flashed in front of their eyes again. Have you ever heard of the position customer service representative? A better title is unappreciative business meat shield, or perhaps ignorant customer chew toy. Now, some big businesses more or less make their customer service arm into basement-dwelling sub-lawyers who spout fine print policies nobody knows about, but invariably involve jerking you, the customer, over. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the companies who pay people to kindly smooth over issues and solve problems that don't really have a department that can provide an answer. Hint, that's all the problems. Let's look at the freight industry where I work. Freight is simple. We are picking things up, moving them somewhere, and setting them down. Where it gets stupid are the expectations of customers who don't really give a crap and just want their stuff right now. I remember when we were in the middle of a blizzard where our terminal was located and we were understaffed due to, a blizzard and people getting stuck on the road. Trucks were going off the road and being blown over. But never mind that. Where's my stuff? One of our customer service reps was calmly explaining, as other lines rung off the hook, to an irate rural customer that we were in the middle of a blizzard and could not justify sending a truck out to the boondocks. The response? It ain't snowing out my window. My other favorite is when customers call in and think the driver who picks up their freight is the exact same guy who's going to deliver the freight across the country. Like, this guy wakes up at 6, brings a whole 54-foot trailer to your business, picks up your single skid of absolute horse crap, and is then going to soldier forward to the coast to deliver it immediately after? It's our going policy to keep this Disney World illusion for our customers. Freight is actually a really difficult industry to understand, and it just isn't worth the time to explain it to a customer who realize mid-explanation that all they really care about is when their freight will get there. Thus, yes, indeed, the freight industry is driven by basically Santa Claus-like powers. Customer service at honest, hardworking companies is here to manage your stupidity and to make you feel smart and satisfied about it. What happened when you had to choose between your partner or your pet? Oh, this is my favorite story from when I worked in a shelter. A guy came in to surrender his cat, with the reason being that his girlfriend didn't like her. He started filling out the paperwork, but partway through he just stopped and said, "You know what? Screw this. I'm going to break up with her instead." He picks up the cat and walks out the door, presumably to leave his girlfriend. I hope he stuck to it and that he and his cat got a happy ending. This was a long time ago, but I'd just started dating this person and I was told they hated my dog. It was a bit of a shock, but I was like, no biggie, just get to know them and you'll fall in love with him. So the next day we had a doggy date and he tried to kick my dog. I literally grabbed my dog, turned around and walked away. That was that. She acted like she'd never even considered that I'd choose the cat over her. I don't think that thought had ever entered her mind. Then she went into a big spiel about how I'm a loser, I'm missing out, there's only one of her, all that crap. Yeah, I knew all of that when I put my foot down over her idiotic jealousy of the cat liking me more than her. The cat is now 16 and still with me, happy in her senior years. There's been other women since her, ones that treated me a lot better than she did. It's a total win for both the cat and myself. Not directly relevant, but once we took in a dog whose human was asked to make this choice. Beautiful Weimaraner. The guy brought the dog out to our house, on a hill in the woods with acres to roam. Dogs absolutely love it out here. And we spent some time walking around letting the dog get used to the place and meet our other furry residents. We could tell it was really hard on both of them and then he left. The next day he kicked the woman out and came back for the dog. Happy ending all round, I'd say. My BFF's little brother got a rabbit this way. One of the BFF's co-workers was told, not asked, told by her boyfriend to get rid of her rabbit so he could have a dog. She complied and my BFF gave the rabbit to her little brother. Year goes by and the co-worker breaks up with the boyfriend. Little bro laughs in her face and said she had already broken that little bunny's heart once, she wasn't getting a second chance. Little bunny lived for 7 years with little bro before age took care of it. I have an elderly rat, going on 4 years, which is quite the feat for one of those. I've raised him since he was a baby with his brother, who passed away 2 winters ago. When we moved in with my in-laws over the summer, they didn't want me to bring my rat. I straight up told my partner that I'll live somewhere else for a while. We'd been living together for almost 3 years at that point, because my rat is my responsibility. He was very old and I was going to see him through to the end. They were a bit upset and accused me of choosing the rat over them, but I explained that he's an animal that relies on us. It worked out. I convinced my in-laws to let me bring him in, and we're all still kicking. He's on his last days, and I'm glad I'm here with him. He'll be buried with his brother when it's time. That's great. Rats really are very sweet when you aren't in a position where you're being plagued by the wild ones. I'd legitimately consider getting another one if I didn't have cats in my life, which I imagine is just a recipe for disaster. It really baffles me how some people don't understand how much a pet can mean to someone. I remember one of my dogs dying overnight before a school day at secondary school, and the teacher mouthed off to the class about me taking a day off for a pet's death. Not me, but my sister chose our cat over her boyfriend of 4 months. He was furious when she dumped him and called her an idiot for picking a, quote, dirty flea bag over him. The cat wasn't a dirty flea bag, he just hated pets and wanted to try and control my sister. I was relieved when she dumped him. I never got good vibes from that guy. Jesus, I can't imagine having the gall to demand any kind of lifestyle change after only 4 months of a relationship, let alone one as major as getting rid of a pet. Not my story, but my friend. His girlfriend forced him to choose between her or the dog, but that dog was a remaining memento from his deceased mother, and of course he instantly dumped his girlfriend. She went from face full with expectations to beet red full of shame and anger and smashed his house windows when she left. Not exactly what you asked for, but I knew a couple that had to break up because she was badly allergic to his elderly dog. They were both understanding of the situation, and there's no animosity. They ended up getting back together after the dog had passed away and are now very happy. For those asking, there was about a 2-year period between their breakup and reunion. She tries allergy treatments and they didn't work. No, he couldn't just leave his dog home alone all night and just spend time at her place. That dog eventually died of cancer and old age around 12 years old. Neither was upset at the other during the breakup, it was truly an NaH situation. I remember him saying my diabetic cat needed to go so he could get a dog. We weren't even living together. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, my cat will outlive this relationship. Considering she was really sick at the time he said it, it was unlikely, and I stormed off. We broke up 6 years ago and my cat is actually still going strong. Pro tip, if your cat is diabetic, they get hungry. We poke ours when she's eating because she's single-minded at that point. No issues. In fact, she comes running when she hears the needle box rustling because she knows it means food. My ex asked me if she thought my dog liked me or her more, and I said me. She got genuinely mad and told me I'm supposed to just lie to her. We didn't last long. Why would your dog like her better? That sounds like some entitlement. Not my partner, but my mum gave away my dog when I was going away on a trip visiting my sister when I was 18. She called me while I was away to explain my dad was going to leave her if she didn't rehome him. Fast forward several years later, my mum gave her cat to my 7-year-old daughter, only to later take the cat back after getting mad at me for something. 2 years later, my daughter still cries over missing the cat. I went no contact with her immediately following that incident. I found out my girlfriend was hitting my dog when I wasn't around. I'd reach out my hand to pet him and he'd flinch. He'd also try to avoid her, and if he couldn't, he'd go submissive. I finally asked because he was in a corner and she approached him and raised her hand as if to hit him. I asked if she'd been hitting him in the head, and she said yes, basically. She just used about 500 words to answer the yes or no question. So I left her, and she was unable to admit that was the reason. I guess answering the question of what happened to you guys with, "Oh, he found out I was secretly hurting his dog," might make for awkward conversations. True story, I'm paraphrasing, my friend had his girlfriend spend the night at his house. While he was making her breakfast, she began complaining about his nasty dog. My friend told her, "You should stop the complaining, the dog lives here and you don't." They broke up a week later. I bred tarantulas professionally for a few years. Most were in a specially designed shed outside, but I had a few in the house. I was totally upfront with people when dating, and if it was a deal breaker, then no hard feelings. I dated this one guy for a few months, but we'd always go out or to his. I didn't really think much of it. Around month 4, he started getting annoyed, and one day straight up asked me how long it was going to take to, quote, sell a few spiders. I thought he was talking about my actual job, so I was like, "Oh, I sell them in bulk to a supplier. He's coming around on Tuesday, actually." And my boyfriend was so relieved, but I couldn't really understand why. So the guy comes around on the Wednesday and sees the tarantulas in the house and goes on an absolute tirade about how I lied to him, how I've broken his trust, and how he's going to need time to heal. Not gonna lie, I just burst out laughing and I was like, "You really thought I was going to give up my job for you?" Well, apparently that wasn't the reaction he expected. He stormed out, yelling about how I was such a dumb B-word for not realizing how great he was. Tried to crucify me on social media, but he just ended up looking like an idiot. Not me, but my sister was dating a guy who angrily accused her of loving her elderly cat more than him. She said she did. She had him for 14 years and they'd only been dating for about a month. I guess he wasn't expecting that because he kind of just shut up and left the house. As someone who recently got into keeping venomous reptiles, I'm sure this will be an issue at some point. Even non-venomous reptiles can be an issue. Several of my boyfriends have been afraid of snakes, and even more tarantulas. Though usually they calm down when you see you aren't treating them like toys or being an idiot about them. Although the narrator is nearly completely on the side of the people who decided to keep their pets and not the crappy partners who made these demands, I do have to at least admit there are certain pets, like venomous reptiles, that would at least be in the negative section of a pros and cons list when I was working out whether to stay in a relationship. But then again, I'd likely just leave and not demand that they get rid of the poor things. I had an incredibly toxic boyfriend who at one point paid the fee for a rescue cat for my birthday. That cat really didn't like him. She wasn't aggressive, she was just skittish, and didn't want to be around him. We had gotten into a fight earlier that day about something unrelated, and he decided to start ranting about the cat and how he believed we should get rid of her, that she was a bad animal just because she was skittish. I mean, she was a rescue, and a very loving one at that if you let her come to you when she felt safe. He started to threaten to leave her at the Humane Society or get rid of her when I wasn't around, so I couldn't stop him. I told him to get out of my house and immediately broke up with him. Butters is still making quality biscuits at my side and loves to take naps with me. I dated a guy who told me he had convinced me to choose him over my cats. I broke up with him shortly after, mostly due to that. Was happily single, then my now husband comes along and says, "I've always wanted to be the husband of a crazy cat lady." Way to win a girl's heart, man. Was getting a divorce, and the ex-wife demanded my dog or she'd take me to court over the house. I reluctantly gave him to her. She called me 5 days after taking possession of him. He was chewing everything of hers, peeing all over her and her new boyfriend's house. I got him back, and he never did any of that to me. I still have him, and he's 15 years old now. I knew my husband was the one because he didn't ask me to choose between him and my dog. I was living in Chicago, my husband was in New York, and we were dating long distance. About 2 weeks before husband was scheduled to come out to move in with me, I rescued a little miniature poodle from under a dumpster in my neighborhood. The dog was horribly matted, reeked of pee, and appeared to have suffered from blunt force trauma to the face, which was already partly healed. I took him to the vet and they told me he needed all but 2 teeth extracted and his jaw reset. I was a graduate student at the time and didn't have 2 coins to rub together, so I asked the vet if they could put the dog down. He was elderly and clearly in a lot of pain. I wouldn't have asked to do it lightly. A total stranger in the waiting room overheard this and offered to pay for the surgery on the condition I give the dog a loving home. Obviously, he got the surgery and came home with me the next day. I named him Leo, after Leopold Bloom, as I was writing a paper on Ulysses at the time. I let him sleep in the bed with me, and the rest is history. He seems to understand that I was his savior. I've never seen a dog get so attached so fast. The guy loved me. 2 weeks later, my husband arrives and this little dog goes immediately into full Freudian murder mode. He fricking hates my husband. Like, sees red and tries to kill him every time we hold hands or hug each other. We think probably whoever hurt his face and abandoned him also hurt his previous mum. Anyway, this tiny dog with no teeth straight up tries to murder my 6'3", 260-pound professional mover boyfriend multiple times every day. My husband can't get up to pee in the night because the dog guards our door like a tiny, yappy, snarly sentinel. He never so much as mentions the idea of getting rid of the dog. In fact, he cares for the dog when I'm busy and covers half the vet bills. We got married 3 years after that, and Leo was at the wedding trying to kill my husband the whole time. When Leo finally passed at 17, he had terrible doggy dementia. He could never remember where he was or how to find me, and eventually we put him down when he started to wet his bed. But he never forgot that he wanted to kill my husband, and my husband never did anything but return equal love to the guy's hate. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. 2 friends of mine dated seriously years ago. The girl's cat had jealousy issues and peed on the guy's feet. The guy put the cat in the bathtub and peed on the cat. The relationship didn't last much longer than that. I had an old friend who chose her ex's dog over the ex. And though there was no choosing in the one isn't around anymore sense, my dog 1000% loves my husband more than he ever loved me. If I hadn't married my husband, pretty sure my dog would have given me an ultimatum. The dog chose me. I divorced my husband and his dog destroyed his house and sadly wouldn't eat properly or do anything but stress until he came to live with me and my dog. But to be fair, my ex is terrible at pets. He just kept him outside all day and night with no interaction. The dog is a Great Dane, and at the time it was me, my toddler, and my dog in a little townhouse. But we gladly took in the big guy over keeping him alone and miserable with his actual owner. I found out that my ex had been talking to her mum about putting my dog down while I was at work and just telling me she ran away or something. I was using her iPad when her mum texted her. Something about the text looked funny, so I opened up iMessage and read through the conversation. She was mad because I cancelled going out of town because my brother couldn't dog sit for a weekend over a year ago, and was upset that I walked my dog for about an hour after work every day and not doing stuff with her. Her white trash mum and her came up with this whole plan, and it seemed like something was going to happen in the near future. Before that moment, I would have never thought I could have violent feelings towards a woman, but now I know in my heart that there's a serious possibility I would have hurt her had she actually done that. So, good thing I left her. True story, my ex told me, I'm leaving, and I was all worried about our cats. Didn't want to lose them, didn't want to separate them. But they say, don't worry, I'm not taking the cats. Immediate relief. I have a 14-year-old calico that started as a family pet, but bonded intensely with me. My husband was very sketched out by cats when we were dating. When things got serious and we talked about our future together, I told him point blank that she had been in my life longer and there was no way I could leave her behind. He started coming over more to spend more time with her. He'd watch My Cat from Hell and read about cat behaviors, needs, and introducing them to new environments. We moved her into his apartment for about 6 months and then drove halfway across the country with her. She's now the queen of our New York City apartment and can't seem to choose which of us she likes better. Well, he got jealous anytime I'd even pet the dogs in front of him. He started treating them terribly. Eventually, he told me that basically he knows I wouldn't get rid of them, but so long as they were around, our relationship would be negatively impacted and would deteriorate. Then we broke up. Imagine feeling threatened and jealous about your significant other of 14 years petting a dog. They're well-behaved, housebroken, with no behavioral issues, no financial burden, and honestly, they were low maintenance in the attention department too. That's when I noticed something was very off and went ahead and proved him right. I didn't get rid of my dogs, and I just started distancing myself. Yeah, I wish I had something more insightful to share about this video, but it's really just a 20 minutes reassurance that people who make these ridiculous demands about their spouse's beloved pets, just based off jealousy about the pet liking the other partner more or taking up their affection, really are just petty trash people. Grow up, get some self-worth, and look at your actions from the outside. I was in elementary school when my stepdad made a comment about getting rid of my cats. I told him that we'd had the cats longer than him and I liked them better. He looked at my mum to defend him and she told him she'd told him not to talk about my cats. One passed away at the age of 14 when I was in college and the other passed away at 19 after I'd graduated. He was never cuddly with them, but it was always nice after that one conversation. 20+ years later, he has his own cat that adores him and hates my mum. When my ex-wife and I were first looking at getting an apartment together, she tried to talk me into getting rid of my dog, so we had more choices for an apartment. I told her I'd never get rid of him because he'd still be there when she left. She was mad, but she got over it. We got married, she got a dog because she was jealous of my bond with my dog, and she'd accused me of making her dog like me more and that I loved dogs more than her. When we divorced, I kept both dogs. When my ex and I split, she left me the cat that only liked me. Ignatius and I are doing great. I ended it before she gave me the ultimatum. I'd noticed that she'd get really annoyed with my dog some days. Well, we broke up once I noticed that my dog would never break my heart. God, do people really do this? I mean, I've had my dog for 12 years and I've known my wife for 4. For her to expect me to get rid of him would be insane. I've told my wife 100 times, if they were both hanging off a cliff and I could only save one of them, I'd save my wife, but I think there'd be a second's hesitation there first. To be fair, anyone giving you an ultimatum to choose between them and one of your loved ones, human or otherwise, isn't interested in a healthy relationship of any kind, and so isn't worth your time. Long story short, never choose the one giving the ultimatum. I personally didn't want any animals when I met my girl. She had 3 dogs, around 80 pounds each, that lived in her house. It really made me nervous about living together. I was never much of a domestic animal lover. I personally saw it as a waste of time and money. We've lived together for 3 years now. We have 5 dogs and they're the best part of my day. Never knew what I was missing out on. I've started seeing someone recently who loves her cats. I'm highly allergic and haven't mentioned it yet. We've only been on 3 dates. I'm afraid it's going to be a deal breaker. It's a shame as everything else is going really well so far. I had to get a restraining order. Too many men will make jokes about harming a cat because they don't like them. Both of the men who I've met personally who were violent about cats did get violent with me as well. I've heard many similar stories online. On our first date, my now husband was talking a big game about how he doesn't like cats and cats don't like him while we were hanging out in my apartment with my 2 cats. I said, well, they were here first, so don't even think you'll win that one. He wasn't asking me to choose, but I wanted to make damn sure he knew I wasn't going to deal with any sort of ultimatum. You can now catch him holding one of our 4 cats to the window and showing them interesting things outside or burying his face in their belly fluff. Who in the world would trust someone that dumped a pet? My dad gave away his dog because his wife said she was allergic. She wasn't, she just didn't like the dog. Oh my god, this is the only story where someone actually gave away the pet. I had a live-in boyfriend. We had been together a year and decided to cohabit because long-distance relationship wasn't fulfilling. I had a cat for 15 years. He didn't demand I get rid of my old man, but he repeatedly made comments about how it was time to PTS because my cat was old and thin. He always commented on my cat's weight. Even went so far as to stop by a vet and pick up a cremation pamphlet so I could shop for urns. I spent loads of money on all the senior blood work, checked his thyroid and stuff. He had a clean bill of health because I always provided him the best nutrition and care. One day I told him, the next time you mention me putting my cat to sleep or imply I'm not doing right by him, make sure your bags are packed. And he was gone 3 weeks after that. The cat had 3 more wonderful years before cancer got him, and I did PTS. People, 15 years of love and emotional investment will trump your new relationship every time. Lightly related, I had to talk my significant other into adopting a cat 8 years ago, and I vehemently convinced him. Sadie chose him the moment we got her. She latched onto him in the car and cuddles him every single day since. She kisses him to wake up and greets him at the door. She walks away when I enter the house and she sees it's not him. I'm lucky she even meows at me. She's cuddled me maybe 10 times in 8 years. I beg this cat that I fought so hard to get for attention. She's one of our favorite parts about our relationship. When did you lose your childhood innocence? When my buddy was in elementary school, his parents would take him to Toys R Us, where, if he was really good, he could choose one toy. He would peruse the entire store before making his important selection. On one such trip, he selects a 36-piece magic set. It's a bit costly, but his mum justifies it because he's been particularly good in the last week or so. On the way home in the car, he sits quietly grinning with his magic set in his lap and wonders how the kids at school will react once he reveals to them that he, in fact, knows magic. Upon arriving home from the toy store, my buddy races off upstairs to finally learn some magic. Keep in mind that he thinks he's on the verge of being a legitimate Harry Potter here. After about 20 minutes, he comes downstairs dragging the box behind him, walks up to his mum with his head hung quite low and asks her if it would be okay to take the magic set back to the store. His mother, concerned with the defeated look on her child's face, asks him why. He looks up at her and very solemnly states, "It's not real magic. It's just a bunch of tricks." When I was in about 1st or 2nd grade, I was an imaginative kid. My grade school was in front of a big wooded area in suburbia. At recess, I started telling my friend about the man who lived in the woods. Things like, "Oh, you see that tree stump? That's his stove. And that fallen over tree? That's where he set up his house." Similar thing to looking at the clouds and seeing dragons, you know? In my head, he was a Rip Van Winkle type of character. Pretty soon, I had a bunch of friends who would come and listen while I talked about the man in the woods. This ended badly when one of the kids mentioned this to a teacher, and I ended up in several hours of interviews with the principal, teachers, and guidance counselors over whether there really was a creepy man in the woods hiding there, preying on the school's attendees, and whether I'd been mistreated by him. I'd never heard most of the things they were talking about. I kept saying it was just a game I made up, but they couldn't believe a kid would bother doing that purely for fun. That pretty much killed the innocence right there. You know what killed my childhood innocence? The bubble jets in the swimming pool. Those frickin' bubble jets in the swimming pool. Probably the time my father showed me his swollen testes after his hernia surgery. Thanks, Dad. I can't recall a specific moment, but the worst feeling is when you revisit a place that you have not seen since childhood, and it's smaller and less impressive than you remember. I think the biggest tragedy of growing up is that simple things no longer give me a sense of awe and fascination. I remember going back to my elementary school playground and seeing the jungle gym thing. It was a sort of hexagonal sort of cage that was so much fun to climb and hang and swing around on, lest you fell to your death from its incredible height. Except now the thing isn't even as tall as my shoulders. The incredibly tall slides that were feats of amazement to even be able to climb to the top of back when I was a kid, they're barely over my head now. So on and so forth, it was a mind-blowing experience at the time. Very true. The narrator was a small child in another country and only recently got to revisit some of the places he was raised in. It's pretty surreal seeing the familiar surroundings, but at half the size you remember them being when you were just an ankle-biter. Shortly after getting AOL access, I learned of a special chat room called GIFs, back in the days when you had to barter your way to adult movies. When I found out my dog hadn't really been sent to a farm in the country. Man, just growing up and realizing that life isn't all about Legos and Batman. Also, I discovered how to tickle my pickle. A bunch of illusions. A trick is something a working girl does for money. When I accidentally discovered the website of the 34th rule. When I learned how to delete my browsing history from my family's computer. When I was 18 and it was the end of my first real relationship, I'd never known pain like that and would never be the same. The heartbreak was so bad that I'd never thought I could be that close to someone again. It took years to get over. I saw people jumping from the World Trade Center on TV. I went home from school that day feeling pretty low. When they changed the voice of Ash on Pokemon. As a kid, I was given a magic kit. My dad says I opened it as soon as I could, then came home to him sobbing 10 minutes later because the wand didn't work. I also cried when I got the Jumanji board game and no crazy plants or animals jumped out of it after rolling the dice. Then on my 12th birthday, I burst into tears after waiting until 1 a.m. for an owl from Hogwarts. I was convinced I had to be a witch. I think by 14 I'd realized that crying wasn't going to open a portal to an alternate reality where my real king and queen fairy parents were. It's alright, my parents told me when I was about 11, about 3 hours into a 12-hour car ride, that I hadn't gotten my Hogwarts letter because I was a squib, and my 5-year-old brother had already shown signs of magic and was going to be a wizard. I cried hysterically in a ball in the backseat for the remaining 9 hours of the car ride. When I was placed in an orphanage, that kind of ruined my childhood. Also, green eggs and ham sucked. When that butthole in 5th grade called me fat. Whatever. I grew up and now I'm pretty good looking. I was 3 years old and I wanted an Oscar Mayer weenie whistle. Christmas came, there was no weenie whistle. In school, I noticed that a lot of kids have birthdays in August and September, and then I did some math and figured out it was approximately 9 months after Christmas vacations and New Year's Eve. You know, I don't think I ever lost mine, or had it. At least I don't remember it. I remember this intelligent, conscious state only, no early childhood. 7th and 8th grade, really. People started coming out, doing the deed, and I was in a lunch table where preverted jokes were the norm. When I heard Santa isn't real at the age of 46. I was on E outside a club and pretty drunk. I got separated from my friends and I found myself turning down the advances of some Middle Eastern guy who kept asking me to come back to his apartment for wine. I told him I wasn't gay and he just replied desperately, "Oh, none of that, just wine." I then realized he was holding his throbbing member in the open air and has got this really pained expression on his face. I ran and was never innocent again. The first time I realized that not only was the advice my father was giving me wrong, it actually hurt me more than helped. I had a rough time growing up because the kids at school picked on me constantly. My dad advised me to beat them up, thinking that what worked for him would work for me. And after all, my dad was the smartest guy ever. He couldn't be wrong. Well, I got suspended and the teasing became even worse. Turns out beating them up is bad advice to give a tiny elementary school girl. It made me realize how culturally blind my dad was and to take all of his future advice with several grains of salt. I heard my dad fall down the stairs while he was carrying the Christmas presents to the tree when I was 7. I found out then and there that there was no such thing as Santa, the Easter Bunny, or the others. And my dad was fine, if you really need to know. Probably when I watched the Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon. At the time, I was so frickin' excited for new episodes of Ren and Stimpy, and then they began doing it in the butt, which was a total curveball of what I was expecting. I knew it was going to be more mature, but I didn't know it was that adult. Probably when my dad and I went to pick up my best friend for baseball practice in 4th grade. He was hit by a truck when he was riding his bike minutes before we got there. Crap, dude, I'm 26 and I'm still the same happy-go-lucky, naive little jerk I was at 8, except with money. It's kind of fun. I think it was the summer before the start of my senior year of high school. I knew that I'd probably be working the following summers through college, so I took a moment to reflect on what was probably my last day of summer until retirement. I watched the sun set. Yeah, I was dumb enough that I didn't even entertain that the fun was over until high school had been done for like a month, and I realized that I should really be out sorting out whatever my life was going to be next, so well done to you for being smart. I repeated not getting my crap together as soon as I went back to university and spent most of the time just playing video games. As a child, I was kind of a loner. I had a few friends here and there, but didn't really get along with most of my classmates that well. I liked nerdy things like cards and video games and stuff. And man, I loved my Legos. Because of this, I was outrageously close to my grandfather. He was an amazing man. He had intelligence, charisma, charm, and a very powerful demeanor which I really looked up to. My parents both worked very late jobs, so instead of staying up at the empty school till like 6:30 at night, my grandfather would pick me up from school 3 times a week and take me to the local park and 7-Eleven for a Slurpee. In 4th grade, I got picked up after school like any other day. I was beaming with excitement to see my grandpa and go to the park with him. I'd been waiting all day, and I was bragging to my friends that I got to play with him so much. I ran out to his car to find my own dad was picking me up that day. Rather unusual, but I thought nothing of it. When I got to my grandpa's house, there were about 10 people sitting there, all crying and trying to hide themselves from me. My grandma pulled me aside and while sitting me on her lap, leaned in to whisper to me ever so casually, "Your grandfather has died, my son." It was like I could not comprehend her words. In one sentence, she completely split my insides in half. I could barely breathe, much less respond to what she was saying to me. I stared wide-eyed at the wall for about 10 minutes. I silently snuck out of the living room and made my way upstairs to his bedroom. I was terrified to let anyone see me trembling. I remember sitting in his bedroom where he'd hooked up an original NES for me. He and I would play video games all the time, way past my bedtime. I sat there replaying the same level of Mario over and over while I cried the entire night. That day I lost both my grandpa and my first true best friend. When I was 6, I woke up at 4 in the morning to find my mum on the phone crying and my dad on the floor having a heart attack. Most of that night was a blur, but I do remember waking up later that day to the whole family being at my house and my dad being noticeably absent. I was never really the same after that day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Watched a man who drowned and got pulled out of the lake where we were swimming. I was about 11, and my friend and I were rowing out in our little inflatable boat over to all of the commotion, thinking that somebody had a huge fish and needed some help or something. Talk about disappointment. I watched Labyrinth. You know, that package? Yeah. My mother still won't allow Rainbow Chips Ahoy into the house because I threw the most epic fit when I found out there wasn't a party in every box. I just wanted to party. For context, I'm now 25 and live 8 hours away from home, and they're still not allowed. My dad showed me a sketch of his idea for an invention for air conditioning that needs no energy input. I told him about the first law of thermodynamics. I was 8, and he went all redneck dad on me. Mine was when my parents split up. I was 11. Before then, the idea that mums and dads could even do that had never entered my mind. After I understood they were only human and sometimes had conflicting needs, I grew up really fast, especially when my mum started dating again. A few of us were over at a friend's house. I was 13 at the time. He was an only child of a single mum. She left to go to work, and shortly after she was gone, one of our friends was like, "Is she gone for sure?" After getting a confirmation that the coast was clear, he pulls this VHS tape out of his backpack while giggling and hands it to the friend whose house we were at. He pops it in the player, and seconds later this full-on hardcore adult movie scene is playing on the TV set. I was literally dumbfounded, as I'd lived a pretty sheltered childhood, and now there I was staring at this close-up shot of two people doing the deed. My other friends were laughing awkwardly, and I just sat there in shock, unable to take my eyes off that screen. In short, friend ambushed me with my first adult movie. I can tell you that the image did not leave my brain, and I learned to do something about what I was feeling the second I got home the next day. When I showed my cousin my stuff, and she refused to show me hers. We had a deal, man. I was somewhere between 3 and 4. My mother was cheating on my father and discussing this new man who was going to be my new dad. 9 months later, my brother was born, and it was pretty obvious he wasn't related to my dad. New dad never came up again. Nobody ever talked about why my brother looked so different from the rest of us. I remember when I was 8 years old, I asked my dad what a condominium was, because I'd seen the word on signs all around my neighborhood and on TV and whatnot. He didn't hear the inium part. Looking back, he manned up to the situation like a boss, but that still doesn't make my 8-year-old mind prepared for what he said next. Probably when I was 4 or 5 and my sister caught me vigorously thrusting against a life-size tiger stuffed animal and asked me in horror, "What are you doing?" All I knew was that it felt good. I didn't know what I was doing or why I did it yet. I suddenly realized that if it feels good, you shouldn't do it in front of other people, and that I should feel shame doing that where others may see me. A few days later, the leg of that stuffed animal fell off and all of his bean stuffing came pouring out. Poor tiger. Cause of death? My 5-year-old libido. I'd have to say when I was in like 4th grade and it was Valentine's Day. Everyone was giving each other all the bullcrap cardstock Valentine's stuff with maybe a lollipop taped to it if their parents spent the extra money. I bought a heart full of candy for a girl I liked in class. She was my first crush. She saw it was from me and gave me the patented girl, ew look, and I was later told that she threw it away. I was 7 years old. My parents said I had a sister named Sarah Connor who was unalived when I was younger. Then they made me watch The Terminator 15 minutes later. Marvelous. I can't wait till I have a child so I can pretend certain sci-fi films are actually factual documentaries. Darling, this is called Alien. This is why there are no more shuttle launches. As funny as this is as an abstract idea, you really shouldn't do this to your kids if anyone watching this is getting ideas. Creating trust issues and generally scaring your kid is pretty messed up. Also, I've saved some of the darker stuff for the end of this video, so trigger warnings for some pretty rough home situations involving children. I was about 15 feet away from a motorcycle crash that killed 2 people when I'd just turned 14. This was the summer before high school, and varsity tennis spent the summer practicing. Me and about 3 other freshmen picked to make varsity were practicing on the court right next to an interstate, the RT11. A teenager who'd fallen asleep at the wheel, it was 3 p.m., crossed into the oncoming lane of traffic, hitting a motorcycle carrying a man and his wife. There weren't any other cars around at the time, so the four of us ran across the interstate to a florist to have 911 dialed. My friend and I had both taken CPR and first aid training and foolishly thought we could help. I ended up just emptying my guts within 30 seconds of stumbling onto one of the rider's boots that had their foot still inside of it. Also, it didn't help when my friend pointed out that one of the helmets along the wreckage still had the head inside. When I was 11, my dad shot my dog in our backyard while I was still at school. My dad was a really messed up guy. So anyways, that afternoon as I was walking home from the bus stop, Dad drove up and got me, which was weird. Dad was drunk. When we got home, I discovered that the dog was gone. He told me Rusty had run away. I freaked out, ran barefoot through the backyard, and threw some viscera, by the way. I grabbed a leash and went searching for my dog. Hours later, my mum found me walking the street, sobbing and calling for Rusty. My feet were raw and bloody. By then, I was suspicious that Dad had done something. I was furious. I took him out to the backyard, still oblivious to the brains that were scattered everywhere, and still barefoot, and yelled, "What the F did you do to my dog?" He just kind of smirked and told me it would be okay and went back inside. Later, my mum sent me up to bed. Dad was still drunk. My sister was already asleep in her room. I lay there furious and afraid for my poor Rusty. Unbeknownst to me, as I lay awake in bed, my mum and dad were having an epic power struggle downstairs, in which my dad produced another weapon after confessing that he had killed the dog. When I heard a commotion, I ran downstairs. Mum was in the kitchen and she shouted, "Margot, grab your sister and run. Grandma will pick you up." And so I did. I got my 8-year-old sister out of bed and we ran down the street. We were barefoot, and I can remember how my own feet sounded on the asphalt. I remember telling my sister to run faster. I don't think of that day as the day I lost my childlike innocence, because that had been worn away by the years of my father's behavior already. Rather, it was the day I became an adult. We were whisked away to my aunt's house later that night. I'd finally been told what happened. As my uncle and grandma got my sister all set up, my aunt took me into her bedroom and handed me a little red box. I opened it and she asked, "Do you know how to shoot?" Yes, I knew how to shoot. My dad had taught me. Good. You protect them if you have to. And don't worry folks, my mum survived. My dad drowned on a family vacation when I was 10. I was 13 and I had a job. My bank account tipped over the $1,000 mark for the first time ever, and I was beaming with pride holding my balance book, thinking of all the things I could buy. My dad looked over my shoulder and took my book and said, "Son, I think it's about time you started saving for your education." He wiped my account clean, it was in a trust, and put it into RESPs. I was so bitter about that. He probably did that another 5 times over the next 3 years and I hated him for it. That is, until I was able to pay cash for my first year of uni. That was my real first lesson in planning ahead. The opposite of this. When I asked my mum, who does most of the finances and has an MBA, what the plan was for paying for college, her response was, "It's freshman year, we have some money saved, don't worry about it." I really should have worried. The money ran out before the end of freshman year. I managed to pretty much pay my own way through 4 years of college with loans and a really nice surprise in the form of stock from one of my uncles, which my mother also got her hands into and helped me mismanage. 10K turned into about 6 or 7. So, what specifically shattered my innocence? The realization that I understood the current economic situation better than my parents, and that my mum was probably becoming senile. When I found naughty movies on the computer my grandfather gave me 2 days earlier, I literally had a "I'm 12 and what is this?" moment. What? I started independently looking for that stuff at around 12. My moment came when my mum was in the next room holding a piece to her head with my stepdad egging her on to use it because her son, or me, doesn't love her. I opened that door as a 9-year-old kid, called him a butthole, and told her that I loved her. My mum and I are extremely close and have been ever since. And she divorced him and her boyfriend now is a complete opposite, an awesome guy. I was about 9 and went to a Catholic school where everyone had perfect 2-parent households, with stay-at-home mums who always made perfect lunches. One day we had a Muffins for Mums Day, where you would bring your mum to school with you and eat muffins. I brought my mum and we ate muffins. The next day was Donuts for Dads. I was the only kid sitting alone. Nobody talked to me during the festivities. I didn't even get a donut because I had failed to bring my dad with me. There were 2 extra donuts. I remember that it was a pink one with rainbow sparkles and a chocolate one. The teacher gave them to another kid in class. I was thinking, those are my donuts for me and my dad. I left school that day and nobody noticed. I think from then on, I became really withdrawn. I rarely showed up at school. My mum worked, and I'd always been responsible for getting there myself. Things just generally sucked. I was picked on a lot for having an absent father after that day. I think mine disappeared about the day I discovered the temporary internet files folder. It was like the sloppy seconds of internet smut. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.